After 7 years apart, Priscilla never expected to reunite with Gavin under such circumstances. Dressed in a tailored suit, he stood at the center of attention, surrounded by a crowd of admiring classmates, while she, down on her luck, was seen by everyone as the gold digger who met a tragic end. Hello, everyone, welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. Priscilla had barely entered the private room with a tray full of drinks when someone recognized her. Isn't this Priscilla? You're back in the country. The name ignited the entire private room, drawing disbelieving gazes from everyone toward her. Priscilla looked up to see countless once familiar faces, all her high school classmates. When her gaze landed on the man in the suit, her heart gave a violent jolt. Gavin, her first love. He sat right in the center, handsome and distinguished. But his gaze toward her was icy, as if looking at a stranger. Priscilla forced a smile. I just returned to the country not long ago. Compared to 7 years ago, Priscilla had lost much weight and didn't seem to be doing well, sparking gossip among the others. Didn't she go abroad with that rich second generation back then? How did she end up so down on her luck waiting tables now? That guy's a notorious playboy. He must have dumped her after getting bored. She gave up Gavin for money back then, and now he's become City J's top tech tycoon. Hey, you don't think she came here on purpose out of regret, do you? Their tone was far from friendly, for in their eyes, Priscilla was a snob who shunned the poor and lacked compassion. Back when she broke up with Gavin, it had been an ugly scene. Gavin, I'm done with being poor. He can take me abroad to study. Why should I keep struggling with you to get into university? She ended things with Gavin in the year he loved her most. Amid his desperate pleas, she never once looked back. Now, the sparrow that flew onto the high branch doesn't seem to be living the life it desired. The poor student she once dumped has now become a billionaire CEO. She lowered her head to hide her pale face, her hands trembling as she carried the tray, yet forcing herself to appear composed. I just work here. Priscilla bent down to place the wine. But her hands were shaking so violently that she couldn't steady the tray. Crash, all 6 bottles of wine shattered, leaving shards scattered across the floor. The others watched her with mixed expressions. While Priscilla turned deathly pale, the manager rushed in upon hearing the noise. His face darkened at the sight of shattered fragments all over the floor, and when he realized this was actually Gavin's private room, he became utterly terrified. Mr. Gavin, we sincerely apologize. We'll clean this up immediately. The manager kept bowing in apology, but the next second, he immediately vented his anger on Priscilla, shoving her viciously. How could you be so incompetent, useless? Can you even afford to pay for these wines? Apologize right now. Priscilla lowered her head in undignified submission. I'm sorry. She could feel an icy gaze persistently fixed upon her. After the manager finished reprimanding her, Gavin finally spoke with reluctant mercy. Forget it. You may leave now. The manager nodded with an ingratiating smile. Yes, of course. He turned and walked away. Priscilla, her fingers trembling, quickly followed suit. Priscilla, Gavin called her name instead, his cool voice devoid of inflection. Did I say you could leave? Priscilla froze mid-step and turned back to look at him. At this moment, countless memories came flooding back, untimely and unbidden. Back in school, Gavin didn't call her so coldly. He always called her honey. Honey. These are my physics notes. I'll tutor you today. Don't fail again. Honey, drink less ice-cold stuff. It's bad for you. Honey, just wait for me 4 years at most. I'll give you the best of everything. But now, his voice held nothing but endless chill. Priscilla struggled to control the trembling in her hands, her tone humble. Mr. Gavin, is there anything else you require? Gavin spoke indifferently. You don't need to compensate for the wine, but you've dirted my fiancé's shoes. Clean them, fiancé. Under the dim light of the private booth, Priscilla finally noticed a woman nestled beside Gavin. She was exquisitely dressed, a perfect match for Gavin. It was Rosalind, also Priscilla's high school classmate. Unlike the ordinary backgrounds of Gavin and Priscilla, Rosalind was the golden girl who had pursued Gavin for a long time back then, though unsuccessfully. But now, she was Gavin's fiancé. Priscilla turned pale, knowing that in her current position, she had no right to refuse. She lowered her head and walked over, intending to wipe Rosalind clean with her sleeve. But Rosalind refused to lift her foot in cooperation, smiling as she said, We're classmates, how could I possibly impose? Gavin held her shoulder with a gentle expression, seemingly determined to avenge her. Everyone was watching Priscilla's misfortune unfold, with no one willing to speak up for her. Left with no choice, she knelt down to wipe Rosalind's shoes. The high heels looked expensive, and Priscilla moved with great care. Suddenly, she noticed a sparkling bracelet dangling from the slender wrist before her. Priscilla paused mid-motion, her heart suddenly wrenched with pain. This bracelet was all too familiar to her. Once upon a time, Gavin had solemnly fastened this very bracelet around her wrist. "Priscilla, this is our family heirloom. My mother said it's meant for my future wife. Now that you're wearing it, you're mine for life." Back then, Gavin's deep affection in his eyes was something she could never forget. Yet later, she discarded it like trash. Now, this bracelet adorns Rosaline's wrist. Along with Gavin's tenderness and love, everything has transferred to Rosalind now. Priscilla suppressing her trembling, she finished wiping carefully before hastily leaving. On the sofa, Gavin watched her leave, his dark eyes deep and unreadable. Priscilla ran back to the kitchen before finally steadying her heartbeat. She didn't dare enter that private room again, having yearned for him for 7 years, yet she lacked the courage to steal another glance. She asked a colleague to switch banquet rooms with her. Finally making it through her shift, Priscilla threw on her coat and left the club. City J winters were always bitterly cold, but today a blizzard raged outside. The buses had already stopped running at this hour. Priscilla couldn't bear to spend money on a taxi, so she decided to walk back. It would take about an hour or two, something she could handle. Just then, a black Maybach pulled out from the side. The car stopped in front of her, and the rear window rolled down to reveal Rosalind's face. "Priscilla, are you walking? Let us give you a ride." Through the car window, Priscilla vaguely caught sight of Gavin on the other side. Her breath hitched slightly as she shook her head. "No need, thank you." But Rosalind smiled gently. "The snow's too heavy, you'll wait forever for a cab. Let us drive you." Priscilla didn't understand her insistence, but she knew Gavin wouldn't want to see her again. "No need, really." Before she could finish, Rosalind interrupted again. "You're not upset about what happened today, are you? Don't get me wrong. Gavin wasn't targeting you. He just loses his temper easily when it comes to me. Once an intern bumped into me, and he fired them on the spot. Don't take it to heart. We're old classmates after all. Let us give you a ride." As the wind and snow howled, Priscilla felt her body grow cold. Gavin, she knew all too well how much he cared for the one he loved. To keep refusing would only lead to a stalemate. Priscilla had no choice but to lower her head and get in the car. The passenger door opened. It was the driver who had opened it. Priscilla sat in silence as the warmth of the heater enveloped her. The car moved forward. Gavin never glanced at her from start to finish. While Priscilla was forced to witness their intimate interaction through the rearview mirror, Gavin reached out to brush off the snowflakes that had just landed on Rosalind, his gaze tender. "Don't open the window next time. You might catch a cold." Rosalind smiled sweetly and naturally leaned her head against his chest as Gavin embraced her. Priscilla saw him twist his left wrist through the rearview mirror. There was a distinct scar on it. Seeing that scar, Priscilla felt as if her heart had been pricked by a needle. 7 years ago, she called to break up with Gavin on the eve of his competition for a guaranteed admission spot. The once proud young man shattered his arrogance to beg her not to break up, even abandoning a competition to find Priscilla, yet he was involved in a car accident on the way, suffering a severe fracture in his left hand that required surgery. But like a madman, he fled the operating table, covered in blood, to search for her. In the end, what he witnessed was Priscilla embracing and kissing another boy. "Gavin, I've fallen for someone else. Stop pestering me." At that time, she was as cold as ice. Since then, Gavin had neglected the treatment of his hand, which not only ached on rainy days but also made him unable to drive ever again. Rosalind noticed his movement and immediately asked nervously, "What's wrong? Is the wound still hurting?" "It doesn't hurt," Gavin said. Rosalind grasped his wrist, her heart aching as she said, "Medical technology is so advanced now. Let me find someone to examine your hand again." "All right. There might still be a chance to heal it." Gavin let out a cold laugh. "No need. It serves as a good reminder of a foolish and filthy past." Hearing this, Priscilla shuddered violently, her fingertips turning pale from how tightly she clenched them. Rosalind also paled at his words and couldn't help but glance at Priscilla. Just as she was about to speak, before any words could leave her lips, her phone rang first. The name flashing on the screen was Sarah. Priscilla froze. Sarah had been her closest friend in high school, but after she abandoned Gavin, Sarah had scorned her for being a gold digger, and they'd had no contact since. "Sarah, I'll be at your place very soon." Rosalind naturally cooed, then casually glanced up at Priscilla, with a playful glint in her eyes. She directly switched the phone to speaker. "By the way, we ran into Priscilla today. Want to say hello to her." As she spoke, she turned the phone's receiver toward Priscilla, but seconds later, Sarah's sarcastic voice came through. "She dares to come back. I can't be bothered talking to such trash. What a waste of time." Noticing Priscilla's suddenly pale face in the car, Rosalind finally put away her phone. "That's just Sarah's temper, don't take it to heart." Priscilla clenched her hands and nodded stiffly. The people she loved most, and once closest friends, now cast her aside like worn-out shoes. Rosalind hung up the phone just as the driver pulled to a stop. Rosalind stepped out of the car and planted a kiss on Gavin's cheek. "I promised Sarah I'd stay at her place tonight, so I'll be off now, don't miss me too much," Gavin chuckled softly, affectionately ruffling her hair. "Remember to miss me, Rosalind." After Rosalind got out of the car, the vehicle instantly fell into deathly silence. Just as the driver was about to start the engine, Gavin spoke coldly, "Get out." The driver's movements froze immediately. Priscilla also stared blankly at the rearview mirror. Gavin met her gaze in the mirror with an expressionless face, curling a cold smile. "Did you really think I'd take you home? Get out of the car." Disgust was unmistakable. Priscilla felt a pang in her heart, forcing out a single word from her throat, "Okay." Without the slightest hesitation, the car immediately sped away, leaving nothing but dust in its wake. Meanwhile, Priscilla stood alone in the heavy snow wearing a thin, tattered coat, letting the snowflakes soak her entire body. She was even farther from home now, penniless with her phone already dead. Priscilla remained motionless for a long time before finally lifting her numb feet and trudging back through the blizzard. 4 hours later, her body completely frozen stiff, she finally returned to her shabby rented room. Creak, the door opened, and a tabby cat immediately came over. Priscilla crouched down, extending her frost-bitten, purple-tinged hand to pet it, her voice hoarse. "Tess, have you been good today?" Tess was a stray cat she had picked up. She thought it resembled her, so she kept it by her side. "Meow Tilda." The kitten licked her hand, as if trying to warm her up. Priscilla suddenly felt her eyes sting as she picked up Tess with both hands. "At least I still have you, a person and a cat, keeping each other warm in a shabby rented room." Due to catching a chill, Priscilla developed a high fever that very night. She woke up intermittently throughout the night, too uncomfortable to sleep properly. Fortunately, she had the late shift the next day and could catch up on sleep during the daytime. But upon waking, she was drenched in sweat, and the dizzy, heavy sensation hadn't faded. Instead, it grew even more unbearable. But she still forced herself to go to work at the club. She was desperately poor, needing to support both herself and her cat, and job opportunities were scarce, so she didn't dare take time off lightly. The moment she arrived, the manager yanked her aside to change into a different outfit before ushering her into a VIP room. "The big boss is here for a business deal today. Make a good impression." Priscilla had no choice but to nod. As soon as she stepped inside, she spotted Gavin among the crowd of men in tailored suits. "Hurry up and go over there," the manager urged. "If you offend Mr. Gavin again, you're done here." Priscilla finally understood. No wonder the manager had been so afraid of him yesterday. It turned out Gavin was the hidden owner of this upscale club. No matter how unwilling she was, she had no choice but to approach. Priscilla quietly poured him a drink. As she was about to withdraw her hand, Gavin grabbed her. "You're drinking for me today." Not a request, but a command, because he was the boss. He didn't even need a reason. "All right." Priscilla could only pick up the glass before him and down it in one go. The bitter liquor burned her throat, sending sharp pains through her stomach. Then, every toast offered to Gavin was drunk by Priscilla instead. Glass after glass, the high-proof foreign spirits mixed with white liquor left Priscilla ghostly pale. Her head swam with dizziness while her stomach churned with sobering agony. "I couldn't help but run to the bathroom to vomit 2 or 3 times, yet I still had to keep drinking when I returned." Gavin just kept watching her coldly, as if blind to her suffering. He just wanted to torment himself. Priscilla knew, he was supposed to hate her. Priscilla tilted her head back and downed another bottle of alcohol, lost in thought. When she stumbled to the bathroom again to vomit until the world spun, Priscilla turned on the faucet to rinse her mouth, then looked up to see her disheveled reflection in the mirror. Her eyes had reddened without her noticing. Suppressing the overwhelming discomfort, she staggered out the door, stepping out of the bathroom. She unexpectedly saw Gavin leaning against the hallway. Priscilla, startled, lowered her head and tried to brush past him when suddenly, her hand was yanked back. Gavin stared at her profile. After a long silence, she heard Gavin ask, "Have you ever regretted it?" Priscilla's lashes trembled slightly. Her lips seemed to move, but no words came out. Receiving no answer, Gavin continued asking in a low, deep voice, "All these years, have you ever thought of me even once?" Priscilla felt a lump in her throat, unable to utter a word. Her silence felt like denial. Gavin tightened his grip with increasing force, almost bruising her wrist red. After a long pause, he spoke with venom in every word. "Priscilla, falling for someone like you was the greatest disgrace of my life." Then, he violently shook off her hand and strode away. Priscilla felt an excruciating pain in her heart as she stood rooted to the spot, watching him leave. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether Gavin had really been there or if she had imagined it. Seeing his retreating figure just like in the past, she instinctively wanted to chase after him. But before she could take more than a few steps, she fainted. While unconscious, Priscilla had many fragmented dreams. There were moments when she was chasing Gavin. Back then, Priscilla was full of energy, with endless vitality and optimism every day. Gavin, let's have a running race. Okay, if I win, you'll be my boyfriend. If you win, I'll be your girlfriend. Gavin was initially very aloof, but after they got together, he became the one who doted on her the most. Then, she dreamed of their sweetest moments together again. Priscilla insisted on going home with him during lunch break to study together. Gavin, as class monitor, you can't deprive me of my right to study. The boy scolded her with ears burning red. Priscilla, have you no shame? Yet in the end, he couldn't resist her and had to take her home, even personally cooking lunch for her. Finally, she dreamed of her own cold, cruel expression on the day she proposed breaking up. Covered in blood, he asked her why she wanted to end things. You could work hard for 10 years and still not be as wealthy as him. Why should I give up going abroad for you? Gavin, let's part on good terms. Various dreams intertwined as pain spread throughout her body. Gavin. Priscilla woke up with tears streaming down her face, opening her eyes to the sterile smell of a hospital room. She was taken to the hospital. The ward was empty, and she felt utterly exhausted and weak, her entire body in unbearable discomfort. Just then, the doctor walked in holding a medical report. Priscilla remembered she had no money and didn't dare stay longer. Summoning her last strength, she struggled to get up and leave. Doctor, I'll leave right away. The doctor stopped her. MS. Priscilla, we recommend you immediately notify your family to arrange hospitalization. When you fainted, we conducted some tests. The results indicate you have gastric cancer. The words gastric cancer pierced Priscilla's ears with unmistakable clarity. She sat up halfway, dazed for a moment, unable to gather her thoughts, but soon enough, she reached out to take the report, staring blankly at the diagnosis without any trace of agitation. After a long silence, she finally spoke in a hoarse voice. I understand. Life had been bitter enough all these years, even devastating news couldn't muster the energy for an emotional outburst. For her, this was more like liberation. The doctor, seeing such a calm patient for the first time, couldn't help but advise. It was detected too late and is already worsening. You should be hospitalized as soon as possible. Priscilla shook her head and stood up from the bed. She spoke frankly. I can't afford hospitalization. I won't be treated. The doctor was taken aback, then heard her ask, who brought me here? Wondering why she cared about such a thing at this moment, the doctor simply replied, someone wearing the same uniform as you. Seemed like a colleague. She let out a sigh of relief. Thank goodness it wasn't Gavin, at least he won't hear this news. Priscilla felt relieved, stood up calmly, and left the ward. Outside, she tore the report into pieces and threw them into a nearby trash bin. While going downstairs, she encountered a familiar figure. Sarah was now working as a doctor at this hospital. When the two met on the stairs, they both involuntarily stopped in their tracks. Even though the two had long lost their former intimacy, Priscilla still paused in her steps and said softly, long time no see. Sarah glared at her coldly, intending to walk away directly, but ultimately couldn't resist. Her tone was icy. Priscilla, just how thick-skinned are you to dare come back? Back then, Gavin, who was always so proud, was practically on his knees begging you not to break up. Yet you didn't even look back as you left with another man. At that time, he got into a car accident and after surgery, lay in the hospital every day drowning himself in alcohol. If it weren't for Rosalind, he would have lost half his life. Weren't you supposed to be abroad with some rich heir, living the good life? So why come back now? Priscilla felt a bitter ache in her heart. I'm sorry. Sarah forced down her emotions, looking Priscilla up and down, seeing her dressed in rags. Hatred nearly tore her apart. After all that fuss back then, look at you now, what poetic justice. The words poetic justice struck Priscilla like a hammer. She froze momentarily before forcing a smile of utter desolation. She murmured, it truly is retribution. With these words, she lowered her gaze and left. Only when she stepped outside the hospital did she realize her face was already drenched in tears. An all-consuming pain choked her until she could barely breathe. Large teardrops fell uncontrollably, impossible to restrain. Under the night sky, Priscilla walked home alone. Back at the rental apartment, she immediately called to resign, after learning that the club owner was Gavin. Priscilla had no reason to stay any longer, and now, there was even less need to continue working there. After making the call, Priscilla checked her remaining balance. She still had over $2,000 left. After deducting rent and cat expenses, once this month's salary came in, it would be enough for a trip to City S. Visiting City S had always been her dream. In a while, the cherry blossoms there would bloom. Priscilla wanted to see them once before she died, 7 years ago. She had made a promise with Gavin to see the cherry blossoms at S University. It's just a pity that from lovers to enemies, the wish remained unfulfilled until now, and in the future, It would never be fulfilled. Early the next morning, Priscilla didn't go to work but received a call from her manager. The manager was cursing on the other end of the line. "Priscilla, what do you think this place is? Coming and going as you please. I'm telling you, resignation requires a 1-month notice. Or you won't get your salary. Get your ass back to work now." This meant she would have to endure another month. For that meager salary, Priscilla had no choice but to force herself out of bed and get ready for work. The moment she got up, excruciating pain from her stomach overwhelmed her. A metallic taste surged up her esophagus. She rushed to the bathroom, coughing violently. When she looked up and saw the bright red bloodstains splattered across the sink, she froze for a moment. Then she calmly cleaned it up and walked out the door. Arriving at the club, just like yesterday, I was once again summoned to that VIP room. Gavin was entertaining clients again, still making her continue serving drinks. Priscilla had worked as a waitress in many places and knew wealthy people were picky. They wouldn't discuss business in the same spot 2 days in a row. It was simply that Gavin hadn't tormented her enough yet, but she continued to endure in silence. Only the pain in her stomach made her drink noticeably slower than yesterday. Gavin mocked with a sarcastic tone, "Only 2 days in, and you're already giving up." Priscilla suppressed the pain and silently finished her drink. After 3 rounds of drinks, her gaze grew increasingly hazy, and her cheeks flushed with intoxication. Though quite slender now, Priscilla still possessed delicate features that became even more alluring when drunk. A man in the private room grew improper thoughts. Taking advantage of Priscilla's drunkenness to drape an arm over her shoulder, "Mr. Gavin really has no regard for tender beauty, such a lovely thing already drunk. It pains me to see." With one hand caressing Priscilla's shoulder, the other reached to touch her face. Over the years, Priscilla had encountered countless men trying to take advantage, but her status was too lowly. She didn't even have the right to resist. Long numbed by it all, this one today wasn't the worst yet. Priscilla stiffened slightly but didn't move, resigned to endure it. But who would have thought Gavin would lose his temper? He stood up with a dark expression and kicked the man away. Then he charged forward, suddenly overcome with rage, even smashing a chair to pieces. Everyone was utterly shocked, and no one dared to intervene. Priscilla hadn't even processed what was happening before Gavin dragged her away with a darkened expression. She was thoroughly drunk, yet could still feel the blood from his recent fight trickling onto her hand. Staring at that sticky blood, her mind hazily flashed back to that scene from 7 years ago. Gavin had emerged from the hospital covered in blood to find her, only to witness her kissing someone else. The boy's self-esteem shattered in that moment, while Priscilla remained indifferent as she looked at his blood-covered body. In the end, he staggered away, collapsing unconscious after just a few steps. Everyone assumed Priscilla had refused to save him, but in truth, it was she who brought Gavin back to the hospital. That day, he also bled profusely onto her. No matter how much Priscilla tried to wash away her guilt over 7 years, it never faded from her heart. Gavin had loved her to the very marrow of his bones back then, and now, the boy who loved her 7 years ago seemed to have split open the fabric of time to return to her side. Priscilla felt her eyes redden as she instinctively tightened her grip on his hand. Suddenly, an overwhelming wave of intense pain came crashing down, pain and intoxication intertwined, leaving her no room to think of anything else. When she woke the next morning, Priscilla found herself lying on an impossibly soft bed. The sheets were silky smooth, a luxury she'd never experienced before. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw the ornate chandelier on the ceiling. This was a room in the club. Immediately after, Priscilla sat up and realized she was completely naked. Her face instantly paled, and as she looked up, she saw Gavin standing by the window, lost in thought. But his clothes had been changed. Priscilla clenched her hands, vaguely recalling how he had taken her out of the private room after she got drunk yesterday. She couldn't remember anything after that. Noticing she was awake, Gavin turned to look at her, his gaze icy. The next second, he directly slammed a card onto her face. Priscilla stiffened all over, her voice trembling as she said, "What do you mean?" Gavin sneered, as if tired of her games. "You seduced me, and now you're asking what I mean." With that, he picked up the remote and clicked it toward the TV opposite the bed. A dim video begins to play. Its surveillance footage. In the video, she embraces Gavin and kisses him, until the two of them fall onto the bed together. And then, she stands completely frozen, yet genuinely can't remember initiating it. Gavin watches her reaction and cuts off the video. A few seconds later, he spoke without a trace of emotion. "I'm getting married to Rosalind. If you let even a word about last night slip out and upset her, I won't hesitate to send this video to everyone in your circle. Let them see just how wanton you are." Priscilla turned deathly pale, whether it was because of his announcement that he was marrying Rosalind, or because he had actually threatened her like this. She clenched the sheets and said hoarsely, "I'll pretend last night never happened. Gavin thought of how indifferent she had been toward that groper, just as calm and detached. Then, recalling last night in bed, a look of disgust crossed his face as he sneered, "Of course you don't care. How many men have you seduced over the years?" Hundreds, if not thousands. These taunts were nothing new to Priscilla, she had heard them all before, but coming from Gavin's mouth, it sounded even more piercing. She wearily closed her eyes, her heart already riddled with wounds. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and looked at him. "Gavin, I was wrong to abandon you 7 years ago. I can apologize to you. I beg you to let me go. After tormenting me for so long, surely it's enough now." This was the first time since their reunion that she had brought up what happened 7 years ago. Gavin's deep eyes darkened further as he curled his lips into a smile devoid of warmth. "You think this is enough? Priscilla, you cost me half my life back then. How do you plan to repay that?" Priscilla's heart ached as she recalled the blooded youth from that rainy night long ago. Her breath trembled, head bowed as if unwilling to face him. But Gavin forced the issue, roughly tilting her chin up only to find her face already streaked with tears. Instantly, the more vicious words caught in his throat. Priscilla spoke through her tears, her voice trembling. "If I die, will that settle the debt?" Gavin stiffened, his eyes suddenly flashing with anger. "Say that again." For a fleeting moment, as she met that gaze, Priscilla thought she saw a glimpse of the Gavin who once loved her, but in the next instant, all she saw was the Gavin whose eyes burned with hatred. For a moment, she was dazed. "Gavin," she murmured his name, but the next second, Gavin's phone rang, drowning out her voice. It was probably Rosalind calling, because upon hearing the voice on the other end, Gavin's expression completely changed, even his voice softened. "I'll be right there." With that, he immediately left Priscilla behind, turning away in haste. Priscilla watched his retreating figure as he ran toward another woman. Finally understanding completely that the boy who had once loved her with his life would never return. After this day, Priscilla didn't see Gavin for several days when she went back to work. She forced herself to work every day, returning to her damp and dim rental where she and her kitten kept each other warm. As her illness worsened, the pain often kept her awake at night. One evening, she turned on the TV only to see the news of Gavin and Rosalind's wedding announcement. It was a perfect match, two people from equally prominent families, both talented and strikingly attractive, joining forces in an unbeatable union. Late at night, Priscilla watched the tall, poised man on screen through blood-stained coughs, her gaze dim and desolate. Gavin never came to the club himself, yet he made sure the manager sent her there every day to accompany customers with drinks. When he was too busy to come, he'd send others to keep an eye on her. Priscilla had to drink heavily every day, worsening her condition until her stomach ached as if it would split open. Sometimes even painkillers didn't work at all, and the frequency of her coughing up blood kept increasing. After a week of this, she finally couldn't hold on any longer. When she woke up in the morning, her whole body felt weak. Just as she was about to call in sick, she received a call from Rosalind first, who sent her an address and told her to go there. Adding that she had already taken care of her leave, Priscilla went there and found it was a bridal shop in the city center. Priscilla walked in stiffly and found Gavin, Rosalind, and Sarah all present. Seeing her, Rosalind approached warmly and took her hand. "Priscilla, I'm getting married soon and need 2 bridesmaids. One is Sarah, but I can't find anyone else for the other spot. Will you help me?" Priscilla felt a tremor in her heart and instinctively looked toward Gavin. Would he really agree to have his ex-girlfriend as a bridesmaid? Gavin looked cold, his eyes warning her not to upset Rosalind. Under such a gaze, Priscilla hadn't even opened her mouth when Sarah's mocking voice chimed in again. "Rosalind, you're just too kind. Aren't you afraid someone like her might ruin your wedding?" Priscilla turned pale, while Rosalind smiled and said, "We were classmates, after all." With that, she simply took her by the hand and went to pick out a dress. Gavin and Sarah acted as if she didn't exist, while Priscilla stood quietly aside, waiting for them to finish their selection. Rosalind held up one exquisite wedding dress after another for Gavin to see, asking him which one looked best. Gavin gazed at her adoringly. "You'd look beautiful in any of them." Sarah deliberately glanced at Priscilla. "TSK, Mr. Gavin, stop showing off your affection." The three of them chatted and laughed. Priscilla seemed utterly out of place. Finally, after making her choice, she fled into the fitting room like an escape, stealing a brief moment to catch her breath. While changing into the bridesmaid dress, she suddenly found the zipper stuck. Priscilla instinctively called out, "Sarah." She had meant to ask Sarah for help, but the moment the name left her lips, she remembered they were no longer best friends. She froze for a moment, then had no choice but to keep tugging with all her strength. But then, another hand reached in, the next second. His tall frame squeezed into the cramped fitting room, Gavin pinning her against the wall as he helped pull up the zipper. The gesture was undeniably intimate, Priscilla holding her breath in nervous tension. Just as I was about to speak, a pained cry came from the opposite cubicle the next second. It was Rosalind who had accidentally twisted her ankle. Gavin's expression changed instantly, and he immediately turned to check on Rosalind. After trying on the dresses, it was just noon. Rosalind said she wanted to thank Priscilla and even specially took her out for lunch. They went to a Western restaurant, reportedly also Rosalind's favorite. Priscilla, their signature steak is delicious. I'll order one for you too. She was very enthusiastic, but Priscilla, suffering from stomach cancer, couldn't eat such food at all. Still, she didn't want to embarrass her and ordered it with thanks. Sarah scoffed while scanning the menu. Rosalind studied abroad in America. What steak hasn't she tasted? Priscilla stiffened slightly, remaining silent. The atmosphere froze momentarily at those words. Gavin cast a glance at Priscilla, his gaze inscrutable. After the steak was served, Gavin cut it for Rosalind before handing it to her, showing utmost thoughtfulness and consideration. I want a dessert ice cream too. Rosalind coquettishly pleaded with him, but Gavin refused. Eat less cold food. This intimate atmosphere was almost identical to when Priscilla used to date him, only now, the person he cared for would never be her again. Priscilla lowered her eyes, her heart aching, not daring to look up. After the meal, Rosalind took her to tour the wedding venue. At City J's most luxurious hotel, golden roses covered every surface, and a simulated starry sky stretched overhead. Sarah exclaimed in admiration. It's breathtaking, Rosalind. You must be the happiest bride. Hearing this, Rosalind gazed sweetly at Gavin. It was all Gavin's arrangement. Only those who are loved can have such a heartfelt wedding. Priscilla was momentarily dazed when she heard Gavin tell Rosalind, whatever you desire, I'll give it to you. Priscilla, give me 4 years at most, and I'll give you everything you want. Once, she too had heard such solemn vows, gazing at this magnificent hall. Priscilla silently lowered her head, concealing the sorrow in her eyes. He had truly kept his promise, only, his bride was no longer her. Right after, Gavin asked Sarah to help test the stage lift. Only Priscilla and Rosalind remained in the hall. The atmosphere grew quiet for a moment. Rosalind looked at Priscilla, shedding the gentle facade she had maintained all along, her expression instantly shifting as she spoke coldly. I never thought I'd see you again. Weren't you sent abroad years ago? Priscilla was all too familiar with this demeanor of hers and whispered, couldn't stay abroad anymore. Soon, she heard a cold laugh, couldn't stay in a foreign mental hospital. So you think you can stay in one here? Just a few words. Yet they instantly seemed to trigger Priscilla's memories. Her face turned deathly pale in an instant. Rosalind paid no heed and directly handed her a card. Disappear after the wedding, and never return to this country again, otherwise. The threatening words were left unfinished as their gaze caught sight of Gavin and Sarah approaching. She immediately concealed the fierceness in her eyes and shoved the card straight into Priscilla's arms. Just then, Gavin and Sarah witnessed the scene, their expressions darkened as they rushed over. Priscilla hadn't even processed what happened when Sarah charged forward and violently pushed her to the ground, the bank card clattering onto the floor. Priscilla, you're truly incorrigible. We were only gone for a moment, and you already asked Rosalind for money. After all, Priscilla's gold-digging reputation is deeply ingrained in everyone's minds. Not only Sarah, but even Gavin thought so. He shielded Rosalind and glared coldly at Priscilla. That look of disgust spoke louder than 1,000 words. She couldn't utter a single word of explanation, but Rosalind spoke up. Don't be like this, since Priscilla isn't doing well, and we've known each other. It's only right to lend a helping hand. The roles were reversed. She had become the good person now, Sarah said indignantly. Rosalind, you're just too soft-hearted. Priscilla's lips felt parched, and a dull ache throbbed in her chest. Before leaving, Rosalind took out a large bag of invitations from the car trunk and handed it to Priscilla. Priscilla, your handwriting is beautiful. Could you please help us write the guest list? Looking at those bright red invitations. Priscilla nodded silently. Late at night, in the rented room, Priscilla filled out the guest list over and over again. Her rented apartment had no heating, and by midnight the room temperature grew even colder, her hands already swollen red from the cold. Truth be told, her handwriting used to be quite poor, costing her presentation marks in every exam. Later, it was Gavin who patiently taught her how to write beautifully. Stroke by stroke, he wrote in an elegant thin gold-style calligraphy. Priscilla, practice your handwriting well. You'll need to write our names on wedding invitations someday. So the first words she practiced writing were her own name and Gavin's. But now, Gavin's name stands beside another, no longer next to Priscilla's. The scene remains the same. But the people are gone, all things cease to matter. Priscilla stared at the names of the bride and groom, when suddenly her eyes welled up with tears. After standing dazed for a moment, she began coughing again. Accidentally staining one of the invitations with blood, Priscilla hurriedly tried to wipe it, but the blood only smeared more conspicuously. In the end, she had no choice but to write the name Priscilla on the guest list of that invitation. After writing it, she paused for 2 seconds, then with reddened eyes added another line, "Gavin, wishing you everlasting peace and happiness through all the years." As days passed, the wedding day of Gavin and Rosalind drew nearer. Priscilla had only a few shifts left at work. Once she got her paycheck, she could finally go see the cherry blossoms in S-City. That day, when she went to work at the club, she suddenly noticed her colleagues were looking at her differently. Her eyes held both disdain and a trace of apprehension. Priscilla was clueless until she received Gavin's call. His voice was furious. "Priscilla, was it you who posted that video online? How much more money are you trying to extort?" She had no idea what was happening and asked blankly, "What are you talking about?" On the other end, Gavin's voice was terrifyingly low. "Do you really want the whole world to see your promiscuous behavior? Let me tell you, if this upsets Rosalind, I swear I'll tear you limb from limb." With that, the call was abruptly ended. Priscilla had a sinking feeling in her heart as she opened Twitter. When she saw the explosive content that had already gone viral, her breath caught in her throat. That night's video of me and Gavin was actually uploaded online. The video only captured a portion, her wrapping her arms around Gavin's neck and kissing him. Before the two of them tumbled onto the bed, it ended abruptly, but that only made it more tantalizing to the imagination. Gavin is now a prominent rising star in the business world, and news of his engagement to the eldest daughter of the Zhao Group had been hailed as a match made in heaven. But just as they were about to marry, such a scandal suddenly surfaced. The consequences were unimaginable. Her lips turned pale as she saw countless people calling her shameless, a vixen, a homewrecker. This incident even affected Gavin's company's market value. Since the video was exposed, the stock price has dropped significantly. At that moment, Sarah's call came through. "The moment we made contact, I was bombarded with accusations. Priscilla, they're about to get married, and you're causing such a scene, have you no shame?" It seemed everyone had already assumed she was the one who leaked the video. Priscilla parted her lips, only to find herself speechless. Finally, Sarah snapped, "If you hurt Rosalind, I'll never forgive you." Those she cared about all despised her for Rosalind's sake, wishing she would vanish completely. Priscilla hung up the phone, wiping blood from the corner of her mouth. She hadn't even noticed when it had started bleeding, and suddenly thought, perhaps she really shouldn't have come back. Shouldn't have been so selfish. To see Gavin one more time, she had originally wanted to spend her final days here, but the incident was too damaging. No matter how selfish she might be, she shouldn't stay any longer. Soon, she dialed Rosalind's number. Her voice hoarse. "Rosalind, send me abroad." She had resigned herself to fate. Just like 7 years ago, she would let Rosalind send her away from this place. Over there, Rosalind merely gave a cold smile. With public opinion in such an uproar, "Do you really think sending you abroad now would solve anything? Gavin has worked 7 years to build his career, and you're about to ruin it. The only way to salvage this is, unless something bigger comes along to overshadow it." She paused, each word dripping with icy venom. "Priscilla, have you ever heard the saying, to silence the noise, you must create an even greater spectacle, and in this world, there is no greater spectacle than death." Rosalind's voice was light and indifferent, as if she were merely discussing something trivial. Priscilla did not answer, only tightening her grip on the phone. Her face was pale as she stared blankly ahead. She already understood Rosalind's meaning. In an instant, she was abruptly transported back 7 years. 7 years ago, Rosalind stood before her with the same calm demeanor. Looking down at her, she said, "Priscilla, my father is the president of S University. With just one word from me, Gavin's guaranteed admission spot will be revoked. But if you leave him, the spot will remain his. Besides," Rosalind stared at her disheveled figure in the corner, "do you really think someone like you, in this state, is still worthy of him?" Back then, Priscilla was only 18 years old, her reddened eyes concealing the deepest pain and despair. It was around that time when the real Priscilla had already died. What remained was merely a walking corpse, so she wasn't the least bit afraid of death. Hanging up the phone, she continued working as if nothing had happened. After work, she quietly returned home alone once more. The house was rented to her by a kind-hearted old lady, since she wouldn't be staying here anymore. She wanted to clean it up first. While she was tidying up, there came a knock at the door. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Gavin's handsome yet ice-cold face. He went straight to the point. "Tomorrow I'll hold a press conference with Rosalind to explain this matter. Our wedding date has also been moved up to 3 days later. You'd better not cause any more trouble." Priscilla was momentarily stunned. Though her heart remained largely undisturbed, she merely nodded slowly and said, "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness together." Yet somehow these words struck a nerve. Gavin flared up instantly, glaring at her with dark intensity. After a long, piercing stare, he finally gritted his teeth and demanded, "Let me ask you one more time, why did you really break up with me 7 years ago?" Priscilla felt her heart suddenly tighten, yet she still answered, "For money." These 3 words successfully stirred a storm in his eyes. Gavin stepped in and pinned her against the wall. Only to see the things Priscilla had just packed. Thinking Priscilla was leaving again, his expression darkened further as he roared angrily, "Where are you going this time?" Priscilla had no time to speak before feeling someone bite her lips harshly. A furious kiss descended like a storm, Gavin gnawing at her as if gone mad. Finally, he released Priscilla with one hand, pulled out a document from somewhere, and like a man possessed, grabbed her hand to bite her finger until it bled. Forcing her to press a bloody fingerprint onto the paper, through the pain, Priscilla saw 4 large words written on it, "The Sugar Daddy Agreement." Her face turned pale as she struggled desperately, yet she couldn't break free at all. Gavin, who continued pressing scorching kisses across her face and neck after forcing her bloody thumbprint, madness radiated from his entire being. "You like money, don't you? Now I've got plenty. Is $1 million per month enough? You've seen those vile online comments, everyone's calling you my kept woman, my mistress. Where else could you possibly go? Why not make it official, be bound to me for life, tormented by me forever?" With a rip, her clothes were torn apart. This seemed to flip a switch. Priscilla suddenly turned deathly pale and began struggling frantically, but Gavin paid no heed, until he tasted the wetness on her face while kissing her. He suddenly stiffened, releasing Priscilla. Seeing her tear-streaked face, swollen red eyes, and disheveled hair, Priscilla trembled violently from crying. "Don't touch me." Reason returned to him at that moment. Gavin clenched his fists, staring at her for several seconds before violently kicking over a chair and slamming the door behind him as he left. After he left, the small rented room returned to silence. Priscilla sat disheveled on the floor as the cat slipped out from the room to rub against her ankle, as if comforting her. She wept numbly, looking utterly fragile. The next day would be Gavin's press conference. Priscilla got up early and didn't go to work, instead spending all her money on cat food for Tess. She poured the cat food into the bowl and gently stroked the cat's fur. "Tess, I won't be able to stay with you anymore. I'm sorry, this world is too cruel. I have to leave first." Tess seemed to understand her words, raising its head to look at her with shiny black eyes. "Meow, Tilda." Priscilla smiled through reddened eyes, gave it one last hug, then stood up and left home. To create greater public outcry, she needed to make sure everyone would see. Priscilla walked straight toward City J's tallest building, the South Sky Tower. After leaving home, the Nantien building stands a full 99 stories tall. When she reached the rooftop, a cold wind howled past Priscilla, yet she seemed completely unfazed. At this height of 99 floors, even the average person would tremble standing here. She swayed unsteadily at the rooftop's edge, yet her eyes held nothing but lifeless stillness. Her life, in the end, was incomplete. To love someone yet be severed by fate, to desire action yet be powerless to act. The wind howled fiercely as Priscilla stood frail on the rooftop, pulling out her phone to send one last text to Gavin. Message sent. Then, she closed her eyes and stepped forward, one step at a time. 3 seconds later, a thunderous crash echoed, screams of terror rose from below. Meanwhile, the press conference was in full swing, with countless journalists from various media outlets gathered at the scene. Gavin sat behind a row of microphones, inexplicably feeling restless. The next second, his phone vibrated. It was Priscilla who sent the message. "Gavin, can we never go see the cherry blossoms at S University together again?" The mention of S University brought back those unpleasant memories from 7 years ago, not knowing what nonsense she was spouting. Gavin typed out a line with a cold expression, "You're not worthy to go anywhere with me." After sending it, he immediately turned off his phone. Soon, the press conference began, and reporters started their routine questioning, asking him to explain the current controversy. "Mr. Gavin, is it true that the woman in the video was your first love?" Gavin nodded. "Yes. May I ask if your intimate behavior in the video indicates a desire to rekindle your past relationship?" Gavin's expression darkened, and after a few seconds, he answered with a grim face. "The video was just a misleading angle, MS. Priscilla and I were first loves, but we parted on bad terms 7 years ago. That's why there were some arguments when we met again after 7 years. The love of my life is my fiancée. I would never betray her, nor would I rekindle anything with that kind of woman." Meanwhile, Rosalind sitting nearby also picked up the microphone. "I can testify for my fiancé that I was present that day, and the video is entirely fabricated." The press conference proceeded exactly as planned, with Gavin deftly handling every pointed question from reporters, until one journalist stood up and asked the crucial question. So from beginning to end, it was that MS. Priscilla who was doing all the pestering. Gavin clenched his fist but remained silent for a long time. Rosalind glanced at Gavin, her expression shifting slightly as she immediately picked up the microphone and affirmed, "Yes, it was entirely Priscilla who was harassing us, just 3 days ago. I even received a message from Priscilla threatening us to transfer money to her. So the whole incident was Priscilla herself releasing edited videos to extort money." Gavin's expression changed dramatically as he looked at Rosalind in disbelief, seemingly shocked by her words. The words had already been spoken, causing an uproar among those present. These people knew exactly how to stir up controversy, instantly shifting all the blame onto Priscilla. Suddenly, a journalist excitedly pulled out their phone. "I've just received new explosive information about Priscilla. 7 years ago, Priscilla's parents committed suicide after falling into debt, forcing her to flee abroad and spend 3 full years in a mental institution." The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd, instantly clarifying everything. No wonder she's mentally ill. That's why she came to ruin someone else's family, probably to extort money. What a disgrace. If you're mentally ill, you should stay locked up in the hospital. Why did you run out? Gavin listened to these reporters' words in disbelief, his eyes filled with shock and bewilderment. Priscilla, locked away in a foreign mental hospital for 3 whole years. He felt as if he were drowning in the deep sea, his mind completely blank. Before he could even process it, the excited voices of the reporters erupted again the next second. Priscilla, she was even violated. Gavin jolted violently, even forgetting this was a press conference as he abruptly stood up, his face turning deathly pale. "What nonsense are you spouting?" The reporter hadn't even had time to respond when commotion erupted again at the back of the venue, accompanied by someone's startled exclamation, "Breaking news. Justin, Priscilla is dead. She jumped from the 99th floor of the South Sky Tower. Resuscitation attempts failed, pronounced dead at the scene." Gavin suddenly stood up, his eyes bulging with fury as he roared, "What did you say?" His expression frightened many people. A reporter extended their phone, showing him photos taken by passers-by at Nanshan Tower. Someone saw Priscilla jump from Nantien Tower. In the phone's photo, what stood out most wasn't the person, but the blood covering the ground. The glaring red made Gavin dizzy. He couldn't care about anything else. Without a second thought for still being at the press conference, he immediately ran out like a madman. "No, impossible. Priscilla, how could she possibly commit suicide? Someone like her would never take her own life. This must be some kind of act she's putting on." Gavin didn't realize his heart was pounding so violently it might leap out of his chest. He couldn't even wait for the driver, enduring excruciating pain in his left hand as he sped to Nantien Tower despite being unable to drive properly. All that remained on the ground was a large pool of bright red blood. The police had already taken the body away. Seeing so much blood, Gavin turned frighteningly pale. He still couldn't believe the jumper was Priscilla, and immediately went to the police station. But because she had jumped from the 99th floor, the body was shattered beyond recognition, impossible to reconstruct its former appearance. Gavin trembled as he lifted the white sheet, staring at the unrecognizable remains, standing rigidly for what felt like an eternity. "What gives you the right to say she is Priscilla? There are no surveillance cameras on the rooftop. But the lobby and elevators have them. The police have already retrieved the footage of Priscilla going up to the rooftop from the building's surveillance." Gavin saw Priscilla's calm yet numb face in the footage, and his heart ached as if it had been thrown into a blender. Heartache. He actually felt heartache. Priscilla was dead. That woman who had abandoned him for money was dead. He should be clapping his hands in delight. Yet his body's reaction couldn't lie. No matter how much he told himself how much he hated Priscilla, the moment he saw that corpse, pain spread through his entire being, every second reminding him of his unbearable agony. He suddenly went mad, reaching out to shake the corpse that was almost a mass of rotten flesh. "Priscilla, I won't torment you anymore, nor take revenge on you. Wake up. You wake up for me." Even as his hands were covered in blood, he seemed not to notice, frantically pushing Priscilla, as if truly hoping she could still stand up. This bizarre scene finally became too much for the police to bear, and they stopped him. "The deceased is gone, Mr. Gavin. Please respect the remains." The day passed in utter chaos. It was supposed to be just a press conference, but unexpectedly, Priscilla ended up jumping off the building. Late at night, Gavin finally returned to the villa in a dejected state, but at the entrance of the villa where he lived, a figure had been waiting there all along. Upon seeing Gavin, the figure immediately walked over, their steps somewhat hurried. "Mr. Gavin." Jay blocked his path, only to see Gavin's face filled with lifeless despair. Upon seeing Jay, his eyes flickered slightly, finally recalling that this was the person who had claimed at today's press conference that Priscilla was once. Jay reached out desperately as if pleading for help. "Gavin, I've waited for you all day. You have to save me." Gavin coldly shook him off. "Why should I save you? Priscilla was once violated. I'm not spreading rumors. 7 years ago, she was raped by your fiancé's cousin, Homer. The night was too quiet, yet J.S. words exploded in Gavin's ears like a bomb. Gavin suddenly looked up, gripping J.S. collar with both hands, and asked through gritted teeth, "Say that again." Jay could barely breathe. Yet as a journalist, he couldn't accept the truth being buried. He had pursued this case for over 3 years. Only today did he finally get the chance to bring up this nearly forgotten cold case in such a public manner. 7 years ago, Priscilla had filed a police report, but it was dismissed on grounds of mental instability. It was Rosalind who took her away. Soon after, she went abroad. Do you know where she was sent overseas? The Los Angeles Psychiatric Hospital. Priscilla stayed there for a full 4 years. It wasn't until 3 years ago that she finally escaped. I only recently found out she actually returned to City J. Every word felt like a knife stabbing into Gavin's heart. The veins on his forehead bulged as he suddenly threw a punch at Jay's face. Rape, police report, mental hospital. No way, how could this be? Jay finally broke free from his grip, gasping for breath. The reason I came to you is because I told the truth at the press conference. Homer and the Quincy family won't let me go. Help me, and I can lead you to the truth. Gavin felt his entire mind go blank. He instinctively refused to believe J.S. words. Why should I trust you? Jay had anticipated Gavin's question, wiping the blood from his face. He pulled a voice recorder from his pocket. He reached out and pressed. Priscilla's fragile and trembling voice came through. That night, Homer came to the school looking for Rosalind and happened to run into me. He said he wasn't familiar with the school and asked me to show him the way, so I agreed, but later, he said he'd forgotten something at home and wanted me to go back with him. I felt something was off and didn't want to go, but he forcibly dragged me into the car. Gavin's palms were bleeding from how hard he'd clenched his fists. He couldn't bear to listen any longer. Jay turned off the recorder. 3 years ago. When I went to the mental hospital where she was staying to conduct an investigation, she sought me out on her own. She wanted me to take her out and told me this. She said she wanted to return to her home country. I asked her why she wanted to come back, and she said she wanted to see someone, to see the cherry blossoms at S University. So it wasn't until this online controversy surfaced that I realized the person she wanted to see must have been you. Gavin turned deathly pale. Suddenly he remembered Priscilla's text message to him before she jumped. Gavin, can we no longer go see the cherry blossoms at S University together? He finally remembered it was their promise when they were 18, to attend S University together, to see the cherry blossoms there. Turns out, she wasn't the one who forgot this vow, it's him. Gavin was trembling all over as the villa's butler hurried out behind him. Sir, what's wrong? Gavin stood frozen in place, remaining silent for a long time. 7 years ago, he would thoroughly investigate every detail of what happened. After a long pause, he pointed at Jay and said to the butler, "Take him inside, arrange for bodyguards to secure the villa, don't let anyone in, and don't let him escape." Jay finally breathed a sigh of relief, knowing Gavin had temporarily decided to trust him. Though puzzled, the butler nodded in acknowledgement. After Gavin finished speaking, he turned and walked away without hesitation. His retreating figure radiating fury. Not even the biting winter wind could extinguish the flames of anger surrounding him. Bang! Homer was drinking at City J's largest entertainment club. He had always been a playboy, coming from a powerful business family that gave him everything he wanted in the elite circles of City J, whether it was wind or rain. At that moment, the door was violently kicked open, startling the young masters and hostesses in the private room. The next second, Gavin walked in, his entire aura icy and menacing. In the crowd, his eyes immediately locked onto Homer. Homer also recognized Gavin and naturally knew this was his cousin Rosalind's fiancé. Having crossed paths with him a few times before, Gavin had always been courteous toward him. The face that had been startled by the violent door-kicking instantly twisted into displeasure. Homer released the hostess in his arms and said to Gavin, "Gavin, what the hell are you doing? Didn't you know I was here?" Gavin strode forward step by step, snatched a bottle from the table, smashed half of it, and drove the jagged edge straight into Homer's shoulder. Ah! Homer hadn't even processed what happened before instinctively crying out in pain. Ah! The others in the private room screamed in shock. Some of the more timid ones even ran straight out the door. A few rich kids were also badly frightened and wanted to help Homer. But Gavin just stomped his foot down on Homer's stomach, pinning him firmly against the couch. Then, Gavin turned to the others and said coldly, "I have something to ask him. The rest of you, get lost." Those men were startled by his gaze, but they still didn't dare to abandon Homer, fearing he might die here today, which would mean they'd be in deep trouble too. "Gavin, this is Homer. Are you trying to get yourself killed?" His Rosalind's cousin, and the son of the Quincy family. They all thought Gavin had gone mad. Even if he was thriving in City J now, There was no need to get the Quincy family drunk, but Gavin acted as if he didn't understand, coldly repeating, "I said, get out, soon." A group of black-suited bodyguards rushed over. The crowd instantly acted as if they'd seen their saviors. "Hurry, hurry, save Homer." But the black-clad bodyguards remained motionless. At that moment, Gavin coldly ordered, "Take this group away." The bodyguards immediately obeyed his command and cleared the private room of all other people. Only then did everyone remember the owner of this club was also Gavin. Soon, only Gavin and Homer remained in the private room. Homer was in so much pain that his face turned purple. His once not unattractive but now dissipated features twisted beyond recognition. "Gavin, I won't let you get away with this." The threats clearly had no effect on the man before him. Gavin stepped closer and spoke slowly. "What did you do to Priscilla 7 years ago?" At the mention of Priscilla from 7 years ago, a visible guilt flashed across Homer's face, but he immediately gritted his teeth and denied it. "I don't know any Priscilla. I have no idea what you're talking about." However, Gavin certainly didn't miss the evasion and guilt in his eyes. The anger in his heart grew fiercer, driving the bottle deeper into his shoulder. Then, with a sudden jerk, he yanked it out. Bright red blood gushed from the wound. Homer screamed in pain once more. Gavin gripped the blooded bottle in one hand, his voice dark and ominous. "Where should I stab next?" Looking at his frenzied expression, Homer was utterly terrified. "Are you fucking out of your mind?" In the end, he trembled as he watched Gavin's hand holding the bottle pause right over his heart. Homer turned deathly pale, desperately struggling to break free from him, but because he was pinned on the sofa, he couldn't move an inch. Just as Gavin's hand was about to come down, Homer finally broke down and shouted, I'll tell you. Sure enough, Gavin's hand stopped. Homer was in excruciating pain, with large beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. Frowning, he blurted out everything that happened 7 years ago. "The first time I went to your high school to find Rosalind. I took a liking to Priscilla. Later, I came up with a way to trick her into getting in my car and took her home. She resisted fiercely, so I only played with her once before stopping. But then she actually went to the police. Our family has connections at the station, so we easily found an excuse to say she was mentally unstable and had the case dropped. Later, Rosalind took her away. I don't know what method she used to send Priscilla abroad. Damn it. It's not like I killed her. Why the hell are you coming after me?" Homer was the kind of person who never saw violating others as wrong, so even now, after Priscilla jumped to her death, he still didn't believe he bore any responsibility. He thought that by revealing what happened 7 years ago, Gavin would let him off, but what he didn't expect was that Gavin's blazing fury in his eyes was intense enough to burn him alive. Hearing Homer personally admit to the events of 7 years ago, Gavin's heart nearly exploded. So, the truth behind Priscilla's departure back then was that she had been assaulted by Homer. He was even falsely accused of being mentally ill and sent to a mental hospital in the United States. A metallic sweetness surged in his throat. Gavin clenched his hands harder than stone, consumed by overwhelming agony. Meanwhile, Homer, seeing no movement for so long, thought he was going to be released. "I've said my piece, now let me go." After a long while, Gavin finally lowered his head and looked at Homer again. Meeting his gaze, Homer felt a sudden tremor in his heart. If before Gavin had merely been frenzied, now his icy stare seemed genuinely intent on taking his life. Homer instinctively shrank back. What are you trying to do?" The answer came in the form of a brutal kick. Gavin lifted his foot and tossed Homer to the ground like trash, his expression as sinister as a demon from hell. "Homer, I promised to make you wish for death but find it unattainable." Hearing these words, Homer felt a chill seep into every cell of his body. Trembling with fear, he shrank backward as Gavin pulled out that liquor bottle and suddenly crouched down. A drop of blood fell from the bottle onto the ground. Gavin raised his hand and viciously drove the bottle into Homer's crotch. A pig-slaughtering scream once again echoed through the private room, but no one dared to barge in. Rosalind. The private room was thick with the metallic scent of blood when Rosalind arrived after receiving the message. The sight of her cousin lying motionless on the floor nearly made her faint from shock. Homer was covered in blood. Were it not for his occasional agonized moans, one might have mistaken him for a corpse. Rosalind rushed forward and grabbed Gavin's wrist to stop him. "Gavin, stop it, he's my cousin." The scene terrified her. And after 7 years of Gavin's gentleness towards her, Rosalind had truly come to believe Gavin would listen to anything she said. But now, Gavin knew the truth of what happened back then. His suit and face were splattered with blood, his handsome features twisted into a chilling coldness that sent shivers down the spine. His gaze turned darkly toward Rosalind. How could he have forgotten? The mastermind behind Priscilla's suffering. This woman was also to blame. This woman, who had feigned kindness and gentleness for 7 years, earning his gratitude, had ruthlessly driven Priscilla to America and locked her away in a mental institution. Now, he would settle the score one by one. Gavin cast a cold glance at her. Rosalind, 7 years ago. What did you use to threaten Priscilla into going to America? Rosalind shivered all over. Ever since that reporter suddenly spoke up at today's press conference, she'd had a bad premonition. Now Gavin had indeed discovered the truth, but she still refused to give up, clutching Gavin's hand as she pleaded with him. Gavin, I was wrong about what happened before. I just loved you too much, and I've been by your side for 7 years. You've fallen in love with me, haven't you? Let's forget about the past, we're about to get married. Fallen in love with you. Gavin sneered. Rosalind, I never loved you. 7 years of companionship had indeed made Gavin deeply grateful to her. So when she proposed marriage, he agreed. He was willing to marry Rosalind and take responsibility for Rosalind for the rest of his life. But from the very beginning, Gavin knew all too clearly he had never fallen in love with her. Even when he thought Priscilla had betrayed him, his numb heart, frozen for 7 years, would still race at the sight of Priscilla. During this time, it was precisely because he realized he still loved Priscilla that he became so furious, so irritable, and so desperate for revenge. He cast himself in the role of the victim, clinging to the humiliation he had suffered 7 years ago, wanting to make her regret it. He tormented Priscilla, and in doing so, tormented himself. But now, the cruel truth has been revealed. It turns out, Priscilla was the true victim all along, and he walked arm in arm with the one who ruined Priscilla's life, vowing to marry her. Gavin wished he could kill himself at this moment. Rosalind shuddered upon hearing Gavin's words. To her, the greatest punishment was nothing more than 7 years of effort coming to nothing. She shook her head frantically. Impossible. How could you not have fallen in love with me? You've already agreed to marry me. Gavin, I love you so much. I love you more than Priscilla does. How could you not love me? Gavin violently shook off her hand, throwing Rosalind to the ground. I agreed to marry you only to repay you for staying by my side all these years. If I had known how you treated Priscilla, do you really think I would have agreed to marry you? He mercilessly laid bare the truth, his gaze now filled with nothing but hatred and disgust for her. But Rosalind refused to accept it. She was just 3 days away from success. She crawled from the ground to Gavin's feet, sobbing. Gavin, don't treat me like this. Priscilla is already dead. I'm the one who will stay with you for the rest of your life. The moment she mentioned Priscilla's death, Gavin's eyes grew even colder. He bent down, gripping Rosalind's neck tightly as if he wanted to strangle her on the spot. I'll ask you one last time, how exactly did you force her back then? What possible reason could have made Priscilla, who was initially brave enough to report to the police, compromise and even agree to go abroad? Rosalind had initially tried to stubbornly hold her ground and refused to speak, but Gavin's grip grew increasingly stronger, until her face turned the color of liver. As the feeling of suffocation overwhelmed her, Rosalind finally understood that Gavin would truly show her no mercy. To avenge Priscilla, he wouldn't hesitate even if it meant killing himself. Fear of death finally prevailed. She struggled with all her might to shake off Gavin's hand and gasped out, I'll tell you. Only then did Gavin finally release his grip. Rosalind collapsed onto the floor, panting in disarray, and stammered fearfully, I told her my father is the president of S University, and if she didn't leave, he'd revoke your guaranteed admission. Boom. Gavin heard a thunderclap directly overhead. He froze completely in place. So that's how it was all for him. Gavin's heart felt hollow, and he could barely catch his breath. So, the one who deserved to die most was him. It was he who caused Priscilla to be locked up in a mental hospital, he who made Priscilla wish for death, he who forced Priscilla to flee back home only to suffer more, he who robbed Priscilla of all hope to live. The one who really killed Priscilla was him all along. Gavin swayed unsteadily, his eyes bloodshot as if filled with bloody tears. After what felt like an eternity, the Quincy family arrived and found Homer lying half dead on the ground. Without even bothering to confront Gavin, they rushed him to the emergency room. Meanwhile, Gavin stood numb-faced, staggering away like a soulless corpse. When he returned to the villa, Jay saw Gavin covered in blood. The housekeeper quickly examined him, only to find that apart from the scratches on his hands, he had almost no other injuries. The blood on him belonged to others. Jay vaguely guessed what he had done. I've been investigating this case for over 3 years and already have some evidence. Gavin, if we work together, we can definitely put Homer behind bars. Yet Gavin remained unresponsive, numbly climbing the stairs back to his room. The moment the door closed, he collapsed to the floor as if all strength had left him. Gavin, when was the last time he'd felt this helpless? 7 years ago, when he'd fled the operating table, desperate to find Priscilla, to beg her not to break up, to wait for him. In the end, he saw Priscilla with another man. That was the first time in his life he truly understood what heartbreak felt like. But compared to today, it was nothing. Gavin recalled many things. Priscilla that night when she got drunk with him at the hotel. He wasn't actually intoxicated, he was just despicably wanting to possess her. Even after 7 years, his desire for her hadn't diminished in the slightest. But when he truly entered Priscilla, he felt no resistance. Nor was there any blood on the sheets. Priscilla's past betrayal of him ignited his fury, reaching its peak at that moment. He thought this was the evidence of her promiscuity with other men, so that night, he tormented her with great cruelty, even insulting her with money and harsh words after she woke up. Now, recalling the sarcastic remarks he once made to Priscilla, Gavin was filled with unbearable regret. That wasn't evidence of her promiscuity, it was her most painful experience. Gavin, what in the world have you done? A cold liquid slid down from the corner of his eye. Gavin felt so heartbroken he could barely breathe. Perhaps due to the extreme emotional turmoil, he collapsed to the ground and passed out at some point. Gavin had a dream. In the dream, he saw the lively and cheerful Priscilla from his high school days. It was also winter. Priscilla refused to wear a padded coat for the sake of beauty, only draping her school uniform over her sweater. Priscilla, if you don't put on more clothes, I'll really get angry. The teenage Gavin deliberately glared at her with a cold expression. But Priscilla wasn't the least bit afraid of him. Taking advantage of the empty space, she pounced on him like a koala. No need, Gavin, you're so warm too, I just need to hold you. As expected, Gavin's face turned red, yet he couldn't bring himself to push Priscilla away. The classroom was empty. In the dream, the two of them held each other quietly. Beautiful and heartwarming. After who knows how long, Priscilla suddenly looked up at him, reaching out with fair, delicate hands to wipe his eyelids. Gavin, why are you crying? Gavin stared blankly at the Priscilla before him, unable to utter a word. That young boy Gavin had vanished. What stood before her now was the present-day Gavin, gazing at the youthful Priscilla. Even his arms trembled as he held her. Priscilla wiped away his tears with a pained heart, but at some unknown moment, the young Priscilla had also vanished. That gaunt and despairing Priscilla stood before him, speaking mournfully. Gavin, you promised to take me to see the cherry blossoms at S University. Why didn't you keep your word? Even in his dreams, he felt the heartache as real as life itself. Gavin reached out to grab this Priscilla, but before he could touch her, the figure before him had already vanished like a gust of wind. Gone. Priscilla, he woke from the dream. His face drenched in sweat and tears. The bedroom was utterly silent. Where could Priscilla be? In the desolate night, Gavin lay wide awake, all traces of sleep gone. The next day, news that the Quincy family was suing Gavin spread throughout City J. Rumor had it that the only son of the Quincy family was still hospitalized, and worse, he would never be able to produce an heir for the Quincy family. But to everyone's surprise, the Quincy family unexpectedly pointed their spear directly at Gavin. The soon-to-be in-law Gavin, this was certainly something new. Just as the crowd waited to see how the Zhao family would make their choice, Gavin directly issued a statement informing everyone that his engagement with Rosalind was annulled. He didn't even inform the Zhao family before directly issuing the statement. When Rosalind saw the overwhelming news online at home, she fainted from anger on the spot. After a night of wallowing, Gavin had already regained his composure. Even if he were to die, he would first avenge Priscilla before doing so. Homer and Rosalind, none of them will get away with it. So after the Quincy family sued him for intentional assault, Gavin immediately countersued Homer in court. Over the years, Homer has abused his status to commit all kinds of wrongdoing. The girls he has violated are far more than just Priscilla alone. Jay has spent these 3 years collecting substantial evidence of Homer's misdeeds, but fearing the influence of the Quincy family. He worried his efforts would be in vain and thus never dared to expose them. Now, with Gavin by his side, he can finally speak the truth without hesitation. Meanwhile, Gavin retrieved the surveillance footage from that night when he confronted Homer, where Homer admitted outright to raping Priscilla and even colluding with the police to cover it up. Collusion between officials and businessmen, this is an unforgivable taboo. The court promptly heard the case, and following this lead, they indeed uncovered the Quincy family's potential connections to higher protectors. Coincidentally, City J had been focusing on anti-corruption campaigns these past 2 years, making this case a perfect example. Thus, the case involving the Quincy family became a priority. As for the lawsuit against Gavin, the Quincy family was already overwhelmed and left the matter entirely to their lawyers. Gavin had entrusted everything to the lawyer and didn't even appear in court himself. He went to another place, Priscilla's small rented room where she lived before passing away. Gavin arrived just as the elderly landlady was cleaning up. She saw Gavin and asked who he was. Gavin looked at the rental apartment and Priscilla's belongings. This was probably the only place in the world where he could still find anything related to Priscilla. He opened his mouth and spoke hoarsely. "I want to rent this place." The old lady simply thought he was an ordinary tenant. The young girl who lived here before jumped to her death. "Doesn't that bother you?" Gavin's heart ached once more. He shook his head. "It's all right. I want to rent this place." The old lady also sighed. That poor girl, when she first came to City J. She had nowhere to stay. I often ran into her while walking in the park and asked why she was always there. She said she slept on the bench at night. Later, I couldn't bear it and let her stay in this house. To repay me, she would always cook and bring me water. After she found a job, she even insisted on paying rent. "Ah, such a kind child." The old woman kept murmuring while sweeping the floor. She didn't see the tall man behind her, his hands trembling slightly. "Meow Tilda." At that moment, a black cat came running out from the inner bedroom, afraid it might startle him. The old lady explained, "This is that girl's cat, named Tess. What a pity though, her whole life was nothing at all like Tess." Gavin stared at the cat, when suddenly a memory came flooding back. Once, when they were fantasizing about the future together, she said she wanted to have a cat and a dog after they got married. "I've already thought of a name for the cat, Tess." "Gavin, I wish you Tess peace. And the puppy can be named Tyler." "Okay." Back then, Priscilla's eyes were filled with hope for the future. But who could have known that so many earth-shattering changes would follow? Gavin closed his eyes briefly, pulling himself out of the memories. In the end, he rented this house, didn't let the old lady take anything from it, and even took the initiative to adopt Tess. The old woman simply thought she'd encountered a kind-hearted soul and left. The shabby rental apartment bore traces of Priscilla's everyday life. Gavin sat alone on the sofa, stiffly reaching out to beckon Tess closer, but Tess was terrified of him, not daring to approach. Cats are perceptive creatures. Perhaps she still remembered that night when Gavin barged in and mistreated her owner. Usually soft-spoken Tess suddenly barked fiercely at Gavin several times. It clearly expressed unwelcome towards him, but unwelcome as it was. In the end, Tess was still stuffed into a pet carrier by him and taken away. The case wasn't over yet, so Gavin had no choice but to take it home to care for it. As he carried the cat out of the car, he saw Rosalind waiting at the door again. Rosalind could no longer freely enter his home and could only wait at the door for Gavin to return. When she saw Gavin, she rushed over with reddened eyes. "It was you who reported my father, wasn't it? Gavin, how could you be so cruel? What did my father ever do to wrong you? How could you harm him like this?" Rosalind spoke with righteous indignation, as if genuinely believing her family had done no wrong. Gavin responded coldly. He abused his power for personal gain. "The vast sums he embezzled over the years through his position as principal weren't fabricated by me." In the past, Gavin wouldn't have bothered with such matters, but such glaring evidence was something anyone with determination could uncover. The only blame lay in their family's excessive wrongdoing. Rosalind choked back a sob, still pleading with him. "Please spare my father. Priscilla's matter has nothing to do with him. If you want revenge, take it out on the Quincy family. Our family has nothing to do with this. Look at this." Before the incident, they were all one big happy family sharing both glory and disgrace. But after the incident, they're scrambling to draw lines between themselves. These rich people are truly disgusting. Gavin recoiled in disgust, avoiding her attempt to grab his hand. "Rosalind, you should have foreseen this outcome 7 years ago when you used your father's power to threaten Priscilla, the Quincy family, and all of you. I won't let any of you off." Just the thought of Priscilla's past suffering made him feel that skinning these people alive wouldn't be enough to quell his hatred, let alone merely ruining their reputations. Seeing Gavin show not the slightest bit of mercy, Rosalind stopped playing the victim. Without the Quincy family and her father, she could no longer act like the high and mighty young miss. Compared to this, her infatuation with Gavin wasn't even worth mentioning. She spoke through gritted teeth. "Do you think you'll get off easy after offending us? We won't let you go. And the company you worked so hard to build will be ruined." Unfortunately, this threat had no effect whatsoever on Gavin. Gavin even laughed after hearing it. Rosalind actually thought he still cared about these things now. All these years, why had he worked so hard? Why had he desperately strived to achieve something great? In the end, it was simply because he wanted Priscilla to regret it. He refused to be abandoned by someone he loved again just because he had no money. And now, the person he loved had committed suicide. Even if the world were to end now, Gavin wouldn't bat an eye, let alone care about his career. He couldn't even be bothered to look at Rosalind again and went straight back to the villa. He even instructed the servants to kick Rosalind out if she ever came again. And just as Rosalind had predicted, the Quincy family and the Zhao family had deeply intertwined their influence in City J over the years. Even though both families were now in dire straits, the other elite families of City J could not tolerate the audacity of Gavin. who had only emerged in recent years. To challenge them so brazenly, Gavin's company suffered severe blows, and all his investors fled at the first sign of trouble. The entire company teetered on the brink of collapse, yet Gavin seemed oblivious, still focusing solely on the Quincy family's case day after day. He clung tenaciously to the Quincy family, showing a determination to perish together if necessary. Others saw that he didn't even care if his career was ruined. Leaving them momentarily at a loss for how to proceed. If he had any weaknesses, they could have been used against him. But Gavin stood alone, without even a single person who could be called a friend. He was like a death warrior, determined to use his own life to demand justice from the Quincy family. Nothing could make him back down. Even Jay, who had been investigating for Priscilla for over 3 years, was startled by Gavin's reckless determination. It had been less than a month since Priscilla's suicide, yet when Jay saw Gavin again, he had become much thinner, no longer the spirited man he once was. It seemed as if he was only living to seek justice for Priscilla. "Gavin, you can't keep going on like this." Even though Jay wasn't particularly close with Gavin, he couldn't help but speak up to advise him. Gavin, however, seemed completely unfazed, simply sitting on the couch feeding Tess, after so many days of effort. Tess finally showed the slightest hint of accepting him. "At least she's willing to eat the cat food he offers now. They're trying to ruin your career now. Are you just going to abandon your company too?" Gavin still didn't look up, replying indifferently, "I don't care about these things. Let them do whatever they want." If his career was gone, he could always work hard to rebuild it. But if his Priscilla was gone, who could ever compensate him for that loss? Seeing his unyielding attitude, Jay had no choice but to stop persuading him. He came today to bid farewell to Gavin. Although the case of the Quincy family is still under investigation, Homer and the forces behind them probably won't escape justice. "I'm leaving the country, and before I go, I want to give you this." In his hand was a voice recorder. Though the contents within were cruel, at least it would allow Gavin to hear Priscilla's voice one more time. Gavin froze for a moment before finally accepting the voice recorder. But he thought to himself that he would probably never have the courage to listen to it a second time in his life. "Thank you." Jay sighed and turned to leave. 3 months later, the case was finally and completely settled. The Quincy family had their big tiger exposed from behind the scenes, while Homer and his father, relying on their connections, had committed numerous crimes over the years, especially Homer, as more than a dozen girls later came forward accusing Homer of raping them. The Quincy family fell from power. Homer was also sentenced to 20 years in prison due to the severity of his crimes. Meanwhile, Rosaline's father was also found guilty of corruption after investigation and was similarly dismissed and sent to prison. Rosalind lost everything and dared not stay in City J any longer. However, all the family's funds had been confiscated, and the remaining money wasn't enough for her to immigrate to any developed country. In the end, she had no choice but to sneak into a small Southeast Asian country. Gavin avenged Priscilla, but at no small cost. His company had gone bankrupt a month before Homer's sentencing. Truth be told, had Gavin been willing to turn the tide these past few months, this outcome might have been avoided. But he seemed unwilling. It was more like he was punishing himself this way, watching his years of hard work go up in flames, which somehow made him feel that he had atoned somewhat Priscilla for the self who had once tormented her. After everything was over, Gavin also left City J, selling the villa he had lived in. When he left, he only took the cat named Tess with him. Before leaving, Sarah came to see him once. In just a few months, Sarah seemed to have lost a lot of weight. During this time, she had also uncovered the truth of what happened back then. She was once Priscilla's best friend. But due to mistakenly believing that Priscilla looked down on the poor and fawned on the rich, she not only befriended the person who pushed her into the abyss but also verbally humiliated her at every turn. Just thinking about those things, Sarah felt immensely guilty. So, she was probably the person in the world who could best understand Gavin's feelings. "Where are you planning to go?" Gavin replied with an unreadable expression. "Back to City Y." City Y was where Gavin attended university. That's where S University is located. Sarah nodded, looking at the cat in his arms. "When did you get a cat?" Gavin paused, lowering his hand to pat Tess's head. "She raised this one." No name was mentioned, but Sarah understood immediately. Her nose stung with emotion as she suddenly stood and walked over to Gavin. Her voice even carried a sob. "May I pet her?" Gavin didn't stop her, lifting Tess to let her touch. Sarah, with reddened eyes, reached out to gently stroke Tess's head, tears instantly slipping from the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry, Priscilla, I'm truly sorry. I don't deserve to be your friend at all." 3 years later, in spring, City Y's cherry blossoms were exceptionally beautiful. Next to S University, there was a rather deserted bookstore. Both in front of the bookstore and in the backyard, cherry blossoms were planted everywhere. The owner was a strikingly handsome man who kept a cat and a dog. But they say he has a bad temper, so even though the store is near the school, hardly anyone comes to buy books. Once, a girl wanted to pick a cherry blossom because they were blooming beautifully, but she was sternly chased away. There were also girls who tried to strike up a conversation because they thought the owner was handsome, but without exception, they were all driven away. Over time, people simply stopped coming. The boss didn't seem to mind. Just spent each day staring blankly at his cherry blossom tree. Another spring arrived, and this year's cherry blossoms were exceptionally beautiful. Gavin opened the door in the morning to find few customers in the shop. Alone in the bookstore's backyard, he trimmed the branches of the cherry blossom tree. Meow tilde, woof, woof. A black and a yellow figure kept circling around him, as if competing to see who could make louder noises. Gavin remained completely unfazed. While tilting his head back to trim the branches, he said calmly, "Tess, Tyler, go play somewhere else." The two animals seemed to understand human speech. Immediately responding to his cold tone, they wisely lowered their tails and slunk away. Just then, footsteps approached from the bookstore ahead. Gavin didn't look up, merely saying, "Find whatever book you want yourself. The prices are on the back. Just leave the money at the counter." With that said, he continued to carefully prune the cherry blossom tree. Yet the book buyer neither responded nor made any sound of leaving for a long while. After about 10 seconds or so, a familiar voice finally spoke up. "Mr. Gavin, you've truly achieved the art of hiding in plain sight now." Gavin paused, the hand holding the pruning shears, only then lowering his gaze to look. Sure enough, there was Jay's face. 3 years had passed since they last parted. Gavin still felt somewhat grateful to Jay. After all, if it weren't for him back then, he might never have learned the truth in his lifetime. So Gavin unprecedentedly invited someone to sit down and have tea. "The tea isn't very good, I hope you don't mind." Jay looked at Gavin now with some surprise. He had shed all his former aggression, appearing calm and composed, with an air of transcendent detachment about him. "Weren't you abroad all this time?" Gavin asked him. Jay only then remembered the real reason he had come to see him this time. A flicker of hesitation passed through his eyes before he finally resolved to speak. "Gavin, I don't know if I'm going crazy." Even he thought it sounded absurd. But Jay continued, "During my trip to France this time, I saw someone who looked exactly like Priscilla." Bang! Gavin dropped the teacup in his hand, and the tea spilled across the table onto him. The once neatly pressed trousers were now stained with tea. 3 years ago, Gavin was rarely ever shocked. Meow tilde, whether Tess noticed the strange noise or heard that familiar name remains unclear. With tail held high, she scampered to Gavin's legs, circling around them incessantly. After 3 years, hearing Priscilla's name again still brought an ache to the heart. Gavin replied hoarsely, "She's been gone for 3 years." Jay also knew how fantastical his words sounded, but during a media event in Paris, the woman he'd glimpsed bore an uncanny resemblance to Priscilla. "But I really saw her." He didn't want to give Gavin false hope, yet when that face appeared before him, Jay couldn't help thinking of Priscilla. At an event in Paris, "I was representing our newspaper for an interview when I spotted that woman in the venue. Since I still had work to attend to, I only caught a few glimpses. By the time I turned back to look for her, she'd already vanished." Jay spoke earnestly, yet feared he might be overthinking. "Forget it, maybe I really am overthinking. The world is vast, what's so strange about encountering two similar-looking people?" With a sigh, he added, "All these years, I've kept wondering if I'd helped expose the truth sooner. Would Priscilla still have taken her own life?" It was precisely this lingering guilt that made him instinctively believe he'd seen her whenever he encountered someone resembling Priscilla. Gavin remained uncharacteristically silent. Originally, Jay thought that Gavin would be extremely excited upon hearing news about Priscilla, but he just kept brewing and drinking tea the whole time. His dark eyes were lowered, making it impossible to discern his emotions. "It wasn't your fault back then," he said after a long pause. "It was all my mistake. No one was more wrong than him. If not for him, Priscilla's life wouldn't have been so bitter." Jay returned to the country this time for work. Coming to City Y was just a stopover. A chance to tell Gavin about that matter in France. He didn't stay long for tea before hastily taking his leave. After Gavin left, he sat alone in the backyard, holding his teacup and staring blankly for a long time, gazing at the lush cherry blossoms filling the courtyard. His eyes reflected nothing but desolation. For these 3 years, he had come to the place he once promised Priscilla, planting the entire courtyard full of cherry blossoms. "I have a cat and a dog." Everything was just as Priscilla had once envisioned for the future, yet he couldn't feel even a shred of happiness. Living was merely to fulfill Priscilla's wishes. Gavin never dared to hope he would see Priscilla again. After all, back then, that pool of blood beneath the South Sky Tower was so horrifying to behold. That overwhelming crimson would appear behind his closed eyelids for a very long time afterward. He couldn't help but wonder how excruciating it must have been for Priscilla, and how utterly hopeless she must have felt, to leap from the 99th floor without hesitation. Perhaps recalling those painful memories, Gavin closed shop unusually early today. With the door shut, he idled alone in the courtyard, so naturally, he didn't see the luxury car that pulled up in front of the bookstore at dusk. Out stepped an elegantly dressed woman. "It's closed. What a pity. I heard the cherry blossoms at this bookstore are quite beautiful." The woman turned to look at the man in a suit who had just stepped out of the car. That beautiful face was identical to a certain familiar countenance. Thomas smiled, walking over to take her hand. "All right, we'll come back another time then. I have a lecture at S University tomorrow. Why don't you accompany me back to the hotel first to go over my notes?" The woman felt regretful but nodded in agreement. "Let's go." They got into the car, and on the way back to the hotel, Thomas asked her again. "By the way, Vivian, is there anywhere else you'd like to visit while we're back in the country? We'll be staying for several months. I can accompany you wherever you want to go." Vivian thought for a moment, recalling a few places in her mind, but for some reason, she simply smiled and shook her head in the end. "I don't want to go anywhere. Just seeing the cherry blossoms in City Y is fine with me." Hearing this, Thomas said nothing more. Knowing she had always been quiet and probably didn't feel like running around, the two returned to the hotel. Vivian helped Thomas finalize his speech, then went back to her own room to rest. The next day, she accompanied Thomas to S University. S University is a prestigious institution in City Y, and Thomas is also an alumnus. Upon returning to the country this time, he donated an entire building right off the bat. The principal warmly invited him, as a renowned alumnus, to give a speech to the current students. Thomas couldn't refuse and eventually agreed. The auditorium was already packed to capacity. Vivian had often accompanied Thomas to various speaking engagements abroad, so she had long lost interest in his speeches. So while Thomas was on stage, she decided to take a stroll outside alone. It was the season of cherry blossoms in full bloom, and the S University campus was bathed in the radiant glow of spring, offering a delightful and picturesque scene. She walked toward the most famous cherry blossom grove, where many students and tourists had gathered to admire the view. Vast stretches of pink cherry blossoms surrounded her, as if she were immersed in a sea of flowers. Vivian gazed quietly. Over the years, she had seen cherry blossoms in many places, but none had been as breathtaking as these. She seemed lost in thought, her mind wandering for a long time, until the sound of playful laughter and chatter reached her from behind, likely from newly enrolled students seeing the cherry blossoms here for the first time, marveling in awe. Boys and girls, brimming with energy, barely took in the view before they started roughhousing. Vivian had been standing for a while and was growing tired. Now, the noise of their play only added to her headache. Just as I was about to leave, I turned around and bumped straight into a firm chest. Thud, the handbag in my grasp fell to the ground. Gavin was simply holding a camera, though he had planted cherry blossoms himself. Every year when S University's cherry trees bloomed, he would bring his camera to capture them. I was too focused on finding the right angle earlier and didn't notice a woman standing in front of me, after accidentally knocking her things over. He was just about to bend down to help pick up her bag when she had already crouched to retrieve it herself. "Sorry," Gavin stepped back and said. Just then, Vivian picked up the bag, stood up, and met his gaze. In that instant, it felt as though heaven and earth stood still. Boom. This time, Gavin dropped the camera in his hand. He stared blankly at Vivian's face, unable to regain his composure for a long while. "Sir, you dropped your camera." Vivian only reminded him with a single sentence before turning to leave. But just as they brushed past each other, Gavin suddenly grabbed her slender arm with force. He forced out a few words from his throat. "Priscilla," if not for seeing it with his own eyes. Gavin would never have imagined in his wildest dreams that he'd see Priscilla again. His heart pounded violently, as if 3 years of silence had evaporated the moment he saw that face, and his heart instantly sprang back to life. But the woman before him quickly began to struggle free. "Let go of me. Who are you? I don't know you." In an instant, Gavin froze completely again. Perhaps sensing that he had hurt her hand, he instinctively loosened his grip and said cautiously, "I'm Gavin, don't you recognize me?" Vivian watched him warily with a look that the former Priscilla would never have shown, as if staring at a complete stranger. "I don't know you and have never heard of you. You must have mistaken me for someone else." With that, Vivian turned and walked away as if unwilling to speak with him further. Yet Gavin stared at her retreating figure, his mind racing with countless thoughts. Impossible, there couldn't be two people in this world who looked so alike. No, this isn't even resemblance, it's absolutely identical. But, back then, Priscilla jumping off the building was something everyone knew about. How could she possibly reappear? Lost in thought, Vivian had already walked away. Gavin hurriedly picked up the camera and followed, whoever she was. Just seeing that face identical to Priscilla S., Gavin couldn't afford to miss even the slightest chance it might be her. Vivian walked out of the cherry blossom grove and, seeing Gavin still following her, said somewhat irritably, "Could you stop following me?" Gavin also knew his behavior was inappropriate, but he couldn't care less at that moment. "Sorry, I just thought you looked a lot like a friend of mine. She passed away several years ago. I miss her dearly." Noticing Gavin's sorrowful expression, Vivian's eyes softened momentarily before she replied, "I'm sorry about your friend, but I'm really not her." Gavin stared at Vivian's face. It was indeed identical to Priscilla S. Yet the unmistakable wariness in her expression relentlessly reminded Gavin every second, "I'm not the person you know." This strange yet familiar feeling left him with a sense of dissonance. Just then, another voice came from behind. "Vivian, where have you run off to?" Thomas walked over together with the president of S University. Upon seeing Thomas, Gavin clearly noticed a faint smile flicker across her face. She immediately walked toward the man. "Nowhere special, just went to see the cherry blossoms." Gavin also followed her gaze toward Thomas, just as the university president noticed. "Gavin, you're here too. What a coincidence. Let me introduce you, this is Thomas, the CEO of ME Group. He's also an alumnus of our school, a few years senior to you. He went abroad over a decade ago to pursue his career." Gavin subtly sized up Thomas before extending his hand. "I've long heard of your reputation." Thomas shook his hand in return, his commanding gaze sweeping over him like a ruler surveying his subjects, and replied casually, "Hello." Clearly, he had no interest in further conversation with Gavin. He soon turned to the principal and said, "Mr. Ward, now that the speech is over, I have other matters to attend to. I'll take my leave first." All right, no problem. But you must honor us with your presence at next week's school anniversary celebration." Thomas smiled and said, "Absolutely." Then, arm in arm with Vivian, they left S University. After they left, Mr. Ward turned to Gavin and asked, "By the way, about what I mentioned earlier regarding inviting you to teach at the school, have you given it any thought, Mr.?" Ward became the newly appointed principal 3 years ago after Roseline's father stepped down. He is deeply committed to the school's development. Knowing that Gavin planned to settle long-term in City Y, he persistently urged him to teach at the school. Gavin was originally an outstanding graduate of S University, having achieved remarkable success back then through sheer self-made efforts. Had he not abandoned his career, his achievements today would certainly be no less than Thomas's. Mr. Ward had always valued talent and thought that since Gavin no longer wanted to start a business, teaching at the school would be a good alternative. Unfortunately, Gavin had no interest in anything except guarding his unprofitable bookstore. At the moment, he didn't even take Mr. Ward's words to heart. Instead, he gazed in the direction Vivian had left and asked, "Is this Thomas the same person who shorted 2 companies on Wall Street back in the day?" S University's finance department has produced many talents, but those truly worthy of the title genius can be counted on one hand. Gavin is one of them. Before him, the name that resounded like thunder was Thomas. Even when Gavin was still in school, he had heard the legends of this senior who was only 4 or 5 years older than him. Mr. Ward nodded. "That's him." Back then, he offended many people in the U.S., and was even said to have faced retaliation. Who would have thought that after all these years, he still stands unshaken, and his business has only grown larger? That woman beside him, do you know her, Mr. Ward didn't pay much attention to Vivian. From what he said, she seems to be his fiancée, called Vivian, fiancée. Gavin's eyelids twitched violently. For some reason, he always felt that this matter wasn't as simple as it seemed. After returning, Gavin immediately called Jay. It was such a coincidence. Jay had just mentioned seeing someone who looked like Priscilla in France, and then, right after, he encountered someone who looked exactly like Priscilla. "Help me check the attendee list of that event you went to, see if there's someone named Vivian on it." Jay agreed right away, but after hanging up the phone, Gavin was at a loss about what to do next. Even if it's proven Jay saw was Vivian, what difference would it make? That still wouldn't prove any connection between her and Priscilla. She acted as if she didn't know him at all. But in this world, could there really be 2 completely identical people? Gavin didn't believe such coincidences could exist. A glimmer of hope slowly grew in his heart. Perhaps, his Priscilla really isn't dead yet. Tess and Tyler were running around the yard, while Gavin favoritism held Tess in his arms, stroking its fur while speaking softly. "Tess, you miss her too, don't you?" "Meow Tilda." Tess didn't understand what he was saying and just meowed in response. Meanwhile, Vivian and Thomas returned to the hotel. Thomas changed into another outfit and still had to attend a drinking gathering, which Vivian was originally supposed to accompany him to. But it was obvious that ever since returning from University, she hadn't been in the right state of mind. "What's wrong?" Thomas patted her shoulder. Finally snapping her out of her daze, Vivian also turned pale, shaking her head. "I'm fine." Thomas recalled what had just happened, his warm hand gripping hers as he spoke in a steady, deep voice. "Because you saw him." Truth be told, even Thomas hadn't expected to encounter Gavin in City S. Vivian had exhausted all her composure moments ago, sitting weakly on the sofa. Thomas' warmth continuously flowed from his hand to her palm, yet Vivian still felt a chill running through her body. After a long silence, she said hoarsely, "I just didn't expect to see him so soon." Thomas looked at her and said, "Seeing him doesn't matter, because now, you are Vivian." Vivian startled slightly, then looked up to meet Thomas's reassuring gaze, finally feeling somewhat steadied in her heart. Yes, she was now Vivian. She was no longer helpless and vulnerable, no longer at the mercy of others' oppression, yet. Even when returning home she had considered the possibility of encountering people from her past. She never imagined she'd run into Gavin the moment she arrived. The very first second she heard his voice in the cherry blossom grove, Vivian only wanted to flee, yet her feet refused to move. Moreover, Gavin seemed to have changed a lot. Vivian couldn't stop recalling the past, her body trembling involuntarily. Thomas immediately gave her a pill. "Have you forgotten? The doctor said you shouldn't get agitated right now." Being several years older than her, Thomas spoke in a somewhat stern tone. Seeing her like this, he realized she probably couldn't accompany him to the cocktail party today. He then said, "Rest well at the hotel this afternoon, don't go out, and don't overthink things." "All right," Vivian nodded, feeling somewhat guilty. "I'm sorry, I was supposed to accompany you to the reception, after several years together." She still maintained such formality. Thomas couldn't help but feel somewhat helpless. He reached out to embrace Vivian's slender frame. "Vivian, you never need to apologize to me. If the past and the people in it bring you pain, then don't think about them anymore." In his arms, Vivian suddenly felt her nose sting with emotion, then she slowly nodded. Thomas stayed with her for a while longer before leaving. Vivian took a nap in the afternoon, and when she woke up, the emotions in her heart had indeed dissipated quite a bit. After all, it had been so long, and Dr. Corolla had also said that she needed to let go of the past and relax. Soon, Vivian adjusted her mood. Thomas would likely return very late from his drinking gathering, and Vivian, waking up feeling a bit hungry, decided to go out to find something to eat. The hotel was located near S University, with a snack street just a short distance away. Feeling curious to try it, Vivian quickly got ready and headed out. The snack street here was bustling, but Vivian didn't dare eat too much greasy or salty food. In the end, she walked into a shop selling beef noodles. "Boss, 2 tails of beef noodles, no garlic, no cilantro." Alright, the shop wasn't crowded. Vivian found her favorite corner seat and settled in. Watching the college students coming and going outside the door, she suddenly drifted into thought. If she had come here back then, would she have more memories of this place? Then, she shook her head again. Forget it. What's the point of making assumptions about things that have already passed? Soon, the beef noodles arrived. The aroma was delightful, and the portion was just right, but Vivian still couldn't finish it all. She tried her best for a long time, but in the end, she left some uneaten. "You're so thin, miss, you really should eat more," the owner casually remarked while collecting the bowls and chopsticks. Vivian tightened her grip slightly, forcing a smile. Not much of an appetite today. She paid the bill and left the shop. Strolling along the way, she eventually found herself back at the entrance of that bookstore, Nameless Bookstore. She had heard about this bookstore online long ago, rumored to have an owner who was extremely perfunctory about business and would often close shop at the slightest provocation. Yet, perhaps out of customers' rebellious psychology, the less he wanted to do business, the more people were eager to give it a try, so that's why this shop never went out of business, Vivian quietly thought to herself. Just then, 2 young, stylishly dressed girls walked by. You can tell they're students at a glance. One of them looks embarrassed, practically dragged along against her will. "Oh, I really don't dare. Stop pressuring me." The other says with exasperation, "What's there to be afraid of? If you like him, just say it. If you really can't, just leave the love letter there and run. He won't even know it's you." Looks like 2 love-struck girls mustering the courage to confess. Vivian smiled. Forget it. Even the senior who confessed to him before never got a response. He's just really odd. I don't dare. But no matter how scared she was, her friend still desperately pulled that girl toward the bookstore. Vivian finally understood. The person this girl liked was apparently that notoriously eccentric bookstore owner from the rumors. She was about to leave when suddenly, one of the 2 struggling girls finally broke free from the other's grip. Her face flushed as she turned and ran. "Hey, you coward." The other stamped her foot in frustration but had no choice but to give up and chase after her. The two walked away, leaving behind a pale pink letter that fluttered to the ground. It was indeed what they had just dropped. Vivian paused for a few seconds before walking over to pick it up. Sure enough, it was a fallen love letter. Just leaving it on the ground like this, it might get swept away as trash by that strange owner inside. After some thought, she decided to do a good deed and walked into the bookstore with the love letter in hand. The bookstore was quite spacious and neatly organized, but the silence carried a certain coldness. Vivian stood in front of the cash register and called out, "Anyone here?" No one responded. She couldn't help thinking that this boss was indeed as strange as the rumors said, not even worried about someone stealing his books, but she'd heard the cherry blossoms in his courtyard were beautiful, and she'd always wanted to see them. However, entering his yard without permission would probably earn her a scolding. She dismissed the thought. Seeing no one come out, she picked up the love letter in her hand and prepared to leave it on the cashier's counter. But before she could put it down, a tall figure emerged from within. "What's the matter?" a familiar voice sounded. Vivian paused in her movements. Looking up, I indeed saw Gavin. Meanwhile, Gavin was also stunned to see Vivian, especially when he noticed she was holding a letter paper adorned with a heart. Vivian didn't know what to say and instinctively waved the love letter in her hand. "I came to deliver this love letter to you." After speaking, even she herself froze, but Gavin stood still. When some memories suddenly broke through time and flooded back before him, Priscilla used to chase him by sending love letters. Most often when she first pursued him, he wouldn't accept them, so she kept sending one after another until he finally took one. Step by step, he approached Vivian, and that familiar feeling grew stronger and stronger, but Vivian took 2 steps back instead. She regained her composure and placed the love letter on the checkout counter. "I met 2 girls outside who wanted to give you this love letter. They got too nervous to deliver it themselves and left it behind, so I'm just bringing it in for them." Explain it in a few words. It turned out this love letter had nothing to do with her. Gavin yet felt inexplicably despondent. Normally, such love letters would inevitably end up in his trash bin, but now he took 2 steps forward and held it in his hand. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "Thank you. Let me treat you to some tea." Vivian shook her head in refusal. "No need, I have other matters to attend to." With that, she turned to leave, but her arm was unexpectedly caught by him again. "Have a drink with me, as a thank you." Though the excuse of thanking her for delivering the love letter was indeed lame, Gavin couldn't care less at this point. He then added, "The cherry blossoms in my courtyard are also in full bloom. You're welcome to see them if you'd like." His tone carried a hint of probing, as if trying to confirm something. In the end, Vivian stayed for a cup of tea. She worried that refusing too obviously would make Gavin sense something amiss. In the backyard, Gavin skillfully brewed her a pot of Tieguanian tea. Gavin sat at the backyard table, somewhat surprised by the sight of cherry blossoms filling the entire garden. "I heard you're Thomas's fiancé, is that right?" Gavin poured her tea as he spoke. Vivian, thinking he had already begun investigating her, replied nervously, "Yes, we're engaged." However, Gavin showed no reaction and merely said, "That's nice. How did you two meet?" The question crossed a line. Vivian's patience wearing thin. "That's none of your business." Sensing he was probing her, she had no intention of answering. Gavin wasn't surprised and simply replied, "Sorry, every time I see you, I can't help but think of someone else. You look so much like her." Vivian had no desire to hear any of this, so she deliberately asked, "Who is she? Your wife? Are you two very close?" Sure enough, Gavin's gaze froze. After a long pause, he finally spoke slowly, "She is the one I love most, and also, the one I've wronged the most." Hearing these words, Vivian's heart trembled as well. The one he loves most. Gavin, how could he say such a thing? Before she could think further, a dark figure suddenly darted past her eyes. Meow Tilda, the moment she saw the cat. Vivian had a fleeting look of surprise in her eyes, as if sensing something. Tess suddenly rushed back and refused to leave, tugging at her pant leg. "Meow Tilda." Gavin looked at her expression and said softly, "This is my cat. It usually doesn't like to get close to people, but it seems to really like you." Vivian shifted her feet somewhat awkwardly, as if trying to get the cat to let go of her, but Tess just wouldn't budge. She could only say, "Thomas and I also have a cat abroad. Maybe people who own cats have a special scent about them." Her tone sounded quite cold, except for the slight fluctuation in her eyes when she first saw Tess. Gavin didn't notice any other abnormalities in her afterward. After a few seconds, he called out, "Come here." Tess finally let go of Vivian's pant leg reluctantly and walked over to Gavin on her little black legs. "Do you also have a cat? I have a dog too. Maybe we can exchange pet care tips sometime." At that moment, Tyler also sauntered lazily into the yard, his golden retriever coat swaying with each step. Its pitch-black eyes glanced at Vivian as if uninterested in her. Then it lay down under the tree to sleep. One cat, one dog. She paused for a moment before saying, I haven't kept them for long, so I probably don't have much experience. Gavin didn't say anything more, but for some reason, every passing second seemed to grow increasingly unbearable. Soon, Vivian left. The two weren't particularly close. Gavin really had no good reason to ask her to stay. After the person left, Gavin held Tess on his lap again, his voice slightly hoarse. You also think she looks like her, don't you? Meow tilde. Tess let out a cry, as if in response. From that day onward, Vivian never appeared again, nor did she come around S University anymore. Meanwhile, Gavin's nameless bookstore closed its doors, and no one knew what he was busy with. 2 days later, feeling somewhat better, she accompanied Thomas to another public event. The banquet hall buzzed with clinking glasses. Over the years, Vivian had grown adept at such occasions, and she smiled gracefully while socializing with Thomas, until an incredulous voice sounded behind her. Priscilla, is that you? Vivian and Thomas were both stunned. As they turned their heads, they saw Jay holding a camera, staring at her in shock. He had come here today to work. Never expecting to encounter that woman who looked so much like Priscilla again. This time he saw more clearly. This face was almost identical to Priscilla's. That's why he couldn't help but speak up. Meanwhile, Thomas immediately reacted, stepping in front of Vivian and saying, Sir, this is my fiancée. You must have mistaken her for someone else. But Jay was certain he hadn't made a mistake, although Priscilla and he hadn't spent much time together. He had heard her recount her most painful experiences, leaving a particularly deep impression on him. There was no way he could mistake her. You're really not Priscilla, Vivian also calmly replied. My name is Vivian, not Priscilla. Vivian. Jay mulled over the name. It was indeed unfamiliar. His gaze shifted back and forth between the two people before him. Why does this man also seem familiar? Jay quickly searched his memory for where he might have seen this man, but couldn't recall. In the end, Vivian and Thomas both left. He stared at Thomas's retreating figure, still wondering, where have I seen this before? Why can't I remember? Meanwhile, Vivian and Thomas turned to leave, Thomas tightening his grip on her hand, as if to reassure her. Don't worry. Vivian forced a smile. That night. Jay also remembered the matter Gavin had asked him to look into. He hadn't had time to investigate recently due to his busy work schedule. Now that he had run into the person again, he immediately checked the attendee list from that media conference in France. He found it quickly. Sure enough, Vivian's name was on it. The male companion who attended with her was named Thomas, likely the man who had called her his fiancé today, so he must have seen this Thomas in France too. But Jay always felt that the familiarity with Thomas didn't come from having met him in France, but he couldn't recall, so in the end, he had no choice but to call Gavin first. He told him that Vivian was indeed the person he had met in France. I think that Thomas is a bit strange too, Jay said to him. Over there. Gavin remained silent for a moment before speaking up. No rush, perhaps we'll figure it out soon enough. Jay sensed something. Are you investigating him? It's not certain yet. After speaking ambiguously, he quickly hung up the phone. After hanging up, Gavin turned his gaze back to the blonde, blue-eyed foreign man before him and said slowly, Dr. Ross, please continue. The man in the white coat continued. Thomas did indeed receive treatment from me. Before they knew it, the day of S University's anniversary celebration had arrived. Originally, Thomas had wanted to take Vivian away from City Y early due to her poor condition, but having already promised Mr. Ward to attend the anniversary event, he couldn't back out, so they had no choice but to wait until after the celebration to leave. S University was particularly lively today, with banners hung everywhere. Thomas walked arm in arm with Vivian into the school, heading straight for the auditorium. The tickets are already bought. We're leaving tonight. Vivian nodded, but a sense of unease lingered in her heart. Suddenly she remembered passing by Gavin's bookstore on the way. It had been closed the whole time. Maybe he hadn't thought that much about it and had already left. She could only console herself. The entire anniversary celebration went smoothly without any incidents. Gavin, though also an alumnus of S University, never appeared from start to finish. After the event, Mr. Ward, wanting to express gratitude for Thomas's donation of the building, insisted on treating him to a meal. Unable to decline such warm hospitality, the group had no choice but to go to the Southwind Hotel near S University. Mr. Ward had school matters to attend to, and since the private room was already booked, he asked Thomas and Vivian to go first. In the quiet private room, Thomas noticed Vivian looking somewhat pale. Are you too tired today? Did you take your medicine? Vivian nodded. I took it. It's fine. Probably just a bit of low blood sugar. Just then, a sudden commotion erupted outside the door. The next second, with a loud bang, the door was violently pushed open. Gavin barged in from outside. Vivian turned her head to see him, her eyelids twitching fiercely. Thomas darkened his gaze and immediately stood up to shield her. Need something? Gavin had dark circles under his eyes, having rushed back from the U.S. on a grueling 10-plus-hour flight. Though utterly exhausted both physically and mentally, the moment he saw Vivian, all his weariness seemed to vanish instantly. His heart still pounded violently as he ignored Thomas's somewhat warning gaze, step by step approaching Vivian. No, to be precise, it should be Priscilla, but his approach was quickly intercepted by Thomas. Mr. Gavin, what do you think you're doing to my fiancé? Gavin paused, casting a cold glance at Thomas. Your fiancé? Since when has Priscilla become your fiancé? At the sound of the word Priscilla, she couldn't suppress a tremble. Thomas, however, remained unfazed. She is Vivian, not some Priscilla. You've mistaken her for someone else. Is that so? Gavin looked at him and slowly said, Mr. Thomas, are you saying you don't know Priscilla? 9 years ago, you stayed at a mental hospital in Los Angeles, USA. Priscilla was there at the same time, wasn't she? As he spoke, his gaze turned toward the woman before him. Sure enough, a flash of panic immediately crossed her eyes. Gavin has been abroad during this period and has thoroughly investigated everything. Thomas, 9 years ago, he offended a big shot on Wall Street and was retaliated against by being locked up in a mental institution. When he was admitted, Priscilla was already confined there. He found psychiatrist Ross again, who had treated Thomas 9 years ago. Ross said that because Thomas wasn't ill, he had always resisted treatment and refused to stay in the hospital. He was hostile to everyone. And the only person he interacted with was a girl. Ross said the girl would always bring her own meal to Thomas after he knocked his over. Later, she became the only person who could get close to Thomas. Meanwhile, Priscilla and Thomas had escaped from the mental hospital around the same time. Years later, Thomas was seen with a woman who looked exactly like Priscilla, but went by the name Vivian. Gavin had figured it all out. Such a coincidence was impossible. There could only be one explanation. Vivian was Priscilla. At this moment, he was in no mood to play charades with Thomas. He could only think of reuniting with Priscilla as soon as possible. Priscilla, stop hiding it from me. I know it's you. Vivian refused to meet his gaze. I don't know what you're talking about. But now, such denials were useless to Gavin. He pushed Thomas aside and grabbed her shoulders desperately. I know you're still mad at me. Everything that happened before was my fault. I was a jerk. Please. I beg you, stop pretending you don't know me. Bang. Before she could say anything, Thomas's fist had already smashed into Gavin's face. Let go. Gavin winced in pain but refused to loosen his grip. Priscilla, come back with me. I'll never let you go again. Vivian was trembling slightly all over. She wanted to push away Gavin, but found herself completely unable to break free. Amidst the tangle of 3 people, no one heard the ominous creaking sound coming from above. The massive chandelier overhead had loosened unnoticed, now swaying precariously, and Gavin was the first to notice the chandelier about to fall. But it was too late. The fixture had completely detached from the ceiling and was already plummeting straight down. At the critical moment, Gavin suddenly pushed Vivian outward. Boom! Fragments of the chandelier scattered across the floor. Then, the previously noisy private room fell silent for several seconds. Vivian and Thomas both stared in shock at Gavin, watching as crimson blood flowed from his head down his face. Excruciating pain struck. Gavin was still murmuring something, but Vivian couldn't make out any of it, only watching helplessly as he passed out. Gavin, just before losing consciousness, he seemed to hear someone urgently call his name like that. The hospital. Thomas and Vivian stood in the hospital room, looking at Gavin, whose head was wrapped in layers of bandages. Outside, the sky was growing dark. Thomas glanced at his watch. Vivian, the plane takes off in just over an hour. Vivian's eyelashes trembled slightly, her gaze fixed on the pale-faced figure lying on the bed. Of course she knew she should leave, but the sight of Gavin covered in blood moments ago had uncontrollably brought back memories from many years ago. The boy who ran off the operating table to find himself was also covered in blood like this. He begged her not to leave, but back then she coldly and harshly drove him away. It was a scene she could never forget in this lifetime. So now, even though she is Vivian, she simply cannot take another step. Thomas, Vivian hesitated to speak when suddenly everything went black before her eyes as she fainted too. Thomas quickly caught her around the waist, then suddenly remembering something, immediately carried her out of the ward. Gavin woke up to find the hospital room completely empty. His head throbbed terribly, but he still forced himself to get up, wanting to find Priscilla. If he missed her again this time, he feared he would regret it for the rest of his life. Thomas staggered to the door. Just as Thomas came in, seeing him awake, Thomas raised an eyebrow. Still alive. Good, that'll save her from feeling guilty. Gavin grabbed Thomas's collar with all his strength and growled, Where is Priscilla? Give her back to me." Seeing the bloodshot eyes glaring at him, Thomas let out a cold laugh. Now that Gavin had seen through his act, he saw no point in pretending anymore. "Give her back. Gavin, have you forgotten what you did to her? If it weren't for me, would you even have seen her alive before you?" Gavin, his hands trembled as it suddenly dawned on him that even if he found Priscilla again, they could never go back to how things were before. The wrongs he had committed were far too many. Thomas continued, "She's moved on with her life. I can give her everything you couldn't. Gavin, if you truly feel guilty about Priscilla, the least you can do is stay out of her way. I'm already engaged to her. We'll get married once this busy period is over. You've already ruined the first half of her life. Do you want to destroy the rest of it too?" Every word and sentence pierced Gavin's heart like a knife. The joy he felt upon discovering Priscilla was still alive had been completely worn away. His face pale, he stared at Thomas, feeling nothing but heart-wrenching pain. Yes, it was he who had ruined Priscilla's early life. Now, she was already engaged to someone else. She had changed her name. Perhaps she had long since stopped loving him. Thoughts arose from the heart. Gavin, the light in his eyes that had kindled because Priscilla was alive, was gradually dimming again. After a long silence, he stared at Thomas and slowly asked, "Was this her decision?" Thomas gave him a faint glance and said, "Whether it was her decision or not makes no difference. 3 years ago, when she was about to jump from the South Sky building, I arrived in time to take her away. From that day on, Priscilla was already dead. She is now Vivian." That day, Thomas directly took Priscilla away by helicopter, which is why no evidence was left behind. Priscilla didn't want to go with him at first. By then, she had already lost all desire to live. It was Thomas who forcibly took her away. He had gone to great lengths to pull Priscilla out of the abyss. How could he possibly let her fall back into it? If you still feel even a shred of guilt for her, don't look for her, and don't disturb her life again. With these words, Thomas left directly. Gavin stood frozen in place, unable to take a single step. Thomas was right. How could he still dare to face Priscilla? It was he who had ruined Priscilla's originally beautiful life. In the quiet hospital room, Gavin crouched on the ground in agony, clutching his head as he let out a tormented roar. It was his fault. Everything was his fault. After that day, Gavin stayed quietly in the hospital room, like a living corpse every day, neither getting out of bed nor speaking to anyone. Only when nurses came to change his dressings would he move in compliance, like a machine, until 3 days later, Sarah suddenly appeared. She was originally working at a hospital in City J, but had been temporarily transferred to City Y for training these past 2 weeks. "Gavin, what happened to you?" Seeing Gavin, Sarah was somewhat surprised, even almost hesitant to recognize him. His current disheveled and numb appearance was something she'd only seen in terminally ill patients, yet he'd merely suffered a head injury. Gavin slightly raised his eyes and saw Sarah's face. "I'm fine. How could this possibly be called fine?" Sarah sighed, knowing that ever since Priscilla passed away 3 years ago, Gavin had remained in this indifferent state about everything. Thinking of Priscilla, she recalled something else. "By the way, I came to City Y this time because I wanted to tell you something." "What is it?" Sarah's eyes filled with guilt again. 3 years ago, before Priscilla had the accident, I ran into her once at our hospital. But back then, I still had prejudices against her and was only focused on mocking her, forgetting to notice why she had come to the hospital. A while ago, during a doctor's gathering at our hospital, someone mentioned Priscilla. The doctor who examined her back then said. Gavin stared into her eyes and asked urgently, "Said what?" Sarah didn't understand why he was so anxious when Priscilla had already passed away, and replied, "He said Priscilla was diagnosed with stomach cancer." Stomach cancer. Hearing these 2 words, Gavin suddenly sat up from the hospital bed. "You're saying Priscilla was diagnosed with stomach cancer 3 years ago?" "That's right." Sarah felt a lump in her throat at the thought of Priscilla, so even if she hadn't jumped back then, she probably wouldn't have lived much longer. "You need to let yourself off the hook." Sarah didn't know Priscilla was still alive, and only wanted to persuade him to forget the past and start a new life. But before her words had even settled, Gavin had already bolted from the bed like a madman, running out in his hospital gown. "Gavin, Gavin," Sarah called out to him, but he didn't stop for even a second. Gavin searched frantically through the hospital, room by room he went. His desire to see Priscilla again reaching its peak at this very moment. Whether she blamed herself or hated herself, whether she got engaged to Thomas or married Thomas, he didn't care anymore. As long as he could see Priscilla alive and well, he cared about nothing else. But he had to see her one more time, to confirm her Tess. Gavin, dressed in a blue and white hospital gown, ran up and down every floor, looking rather disheveled, but after searching through the entire inpatient building, he couldn't find Priscilla anywhere. He ran out of the hospital. Intending to search other hospitals, The wound on his forehead had reopened from all the running, and thin streams of blood seeped through the gauze, trickling down the side of his face. But Gavin didn't care. Just as he was about to dash out, two people suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking his way. The unsmiling bodyguard in black blocked his path, standing firmly in his way. Gavin said with a gloomy glare, "Get out of my way." The bodyguard acted as if he hadn't heard. Still obstinately blocking the path before him, his gaze then swept past him to look behind Gavin, addressing respectfully, "Boss." Gavin turned around and, as expected, saw Thomas. He hadn't left this hospital after all, so Priscilla must still be here too. Gavin charged forward furiously. "Where is Priscilla? Let me see her." This hospital was filled with Thomas's people, so naturally he knew that Gavin had been frantically searching for Priscilla all day. Seeing him about to storm out in madness again, Thomas worried that if something happened to him, it would only make Priscilla anxious, so he simply sent people to stop him. He fixed his piercing gaze on Gavin. "Didn't you hear a single word of what I told you before? I already know Priscilla has stomach cancer. Let me see her." Gavin was practically roaring. Thomas hadn't expected Gavin to find out so quickly. His eyes darkening, Gavin clutched his sleeve tightly. "Tell me, where is Priscilla? Even if I told you, Priscilla, she wouldn't want to see you." Thomas shook off his hand. "I took her abroad for 3 years of treatment just to barely keep her alive until now. This relapse came suddenly. She's extremely weak. She doesn't want to see you, and I won't go against her wishes." So, avoiding him was Priscilla's idea. Thomas with that, he left with his bodyguards. Later, Gavin finally learned that Priscilla was staying in the VIP ward on the top floor of another building, but the hallway was heavily guarded by Thomas's men, making it impossible for anyone else to enter. But Gavin still came every day. Even though he was too weak to fight those bodyguards, he still refused to give up. Inside the VIP ward, the weather was nice today. Priscilla lay pale on the bed, quietly watching the sunlight outside the window. Thomas walked in, skillfully raised her hospital bed a little, and fed her fruit cut into small pieces. "How are you feeling today?" Priscilla gave a weak smile. "I'm doing fine." After she fainted last time, Thomas had immediately arranged for her specialist doctor from abroad to come overnight. After examining her, the doctor didn't say much to Priscilla, only advising her to rest well and avoid getting agitated. But after leaving the ward, he solemnly told Thomas that Priscilla's body was now at the end of its rope, with cancer cells having spread to other parts of her body unstoppable. Even with the same treatment as before, it might only extend her life by a few months. Thomas dared not tell her the truth, only hoping that Priscilla could live each day lightly and happily. That was also why he let Gavin know where Priscilla was now. Thomas knew that Gavin would always be different to Priscilla. Even though he had hurt her so deeply, Gavin remained the only one for whom she would sacrifice her life. That's why he used Gavin to ignite Priscilla's will to live, silently allowing Gavin to come see her every day. Just then, the commotion outside started again. It had been happening daily for the past few days. Priscilla pressed her lips together and asked softly, "Has he come again?" Thomas said, "Yes, he comes every morning and afternoon, sometimes bringing fruits you like." Gavin's endurance truly surprised him. For several days, he persistently came despite being beaten each time. On multiple occasions, the bodyguards hesitated to strike him again upon seeing the injuries on his head, yet he still recklessly tried to force his way into the ward. Priscilla stared blankly toward the doorway and fell silent. Soon, the commotion outside quieted down, but a faint fragrance of fruit drifted into the room. Probably another one of Gavin's fruits that got dropped and smashed on the ground. As she kept sniffing, Priscilla suddenly remembered when she was pursuing Gavin back then. At first, Gavin was very cold toward her. Once, she saved up for a long time to buy a box of strawberries to give him, but Gavin coldly refused and even ended up knocking over that box of strawberries. Her heart ached so badly at that moment that she couldn't hold back her tears while crouching to pick up the strawberries. For the first time, Gavin, who had always been cold toward her, didn't walk away immediately but watched as she gathered every single strawberry. He gazed at Priscilla with complicated emotions in his eyes, something she didn't understand at the time. Only later did she realize that what she saw in his eyes was probably guilt. But because of pride, he couldn't bring himself to apologize to her. Still, from that point on, his attitude toward her persistent advances softened somewhat. Thinking back to those past events, Priscilla suddenly felt like it was all so long ago. So long ago it might as well have happened in another lifetime. Lying quietly on the hospital bed, she closed her eyes and reminisced about the past, drifting off to sleep without realizing it. Actually, Priscilla wasn't completely unaware of her physical condition. Thomas's increasingly cautious expression and her own growing weakness made Priscilla sense that her days might be numbered. To be honest, she should have died long ago. These 3 years had already been borrowed time in her life. no regrets left. When she woke up, it was already 3 p.m. Priscilla looked at the weather outside and suddenly felt a strong urge to go down and bask in the sun. Thomas wasn't around, so she called a nurse to wheel her downstairs. 2 bodyguards had been following behind all along. Priscilla's wheelchair was parked on the lawn outside the hospital, where many patients had come out for a stroll. Priscilla tilted her head back and closed her eyes, feeling the warm sunlight spill over her body. After a while, the caregiver behind her gently tapped her shoulder. "Young miss, he's here again." The nurse had already recognized Gavin, so when she saw him being stopped by bodyguards just a few steps away, she couldn't help but remind Priscilla. Priscilla opened her eyes and looked up to see Gavin's haggard and emaciated appearance. He looked more like a terminal patient than she did. The two stood meters apart, gazing at each other across the distance. In the end, Priscilla still waved her hand to let the bodyguard allow him through. There had to be closure. Gavin walked over step by step. He had always been fastidious about cleanliness, but a stubble of beard had inexplicably appeared on his chin. The one who had tried every means to see her now found himself at a loss for words when they finally met. Finally, Gavin called out to her at the top of his voice, "Priscilla." How long had it been since she last heard that name? It must have been 10 years. Priscilla was momentarily dazed, gazing at Gavin's face already etched with the marks of time, when a wave of emotion suddenly washed over her. "Gavin, what exactly do you want from me?" she said coolly. Seeing her so composed and indifferent, Gavin's heart ached even more. The thought that she had been diagnosed with stomach cancer 3 years ago, and that he had once pressured her to drink, made Gavin wish he could kill himself. His voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry, Priscilla, it's all my fault. You can punish me however you want, but I beg you not to treat me like a stranger. Please let me atone for my sins." Okay, but in truth, Priscilla had long stopped blaming him, or rather, from the very beginning, Priscilla had never blamed Gavin. Gavin had done nothing wrong. He never knew the truth from the start, and had even rushed off the operating table trying to win her back. So all the revenge he had taken was justified from his standpoint. Priscilla had long since stopped dwelling on those matters. She offered a faint smile. "Gavin, I never blamed you, and there's certainly no need to punish you. These 3 years without me, haven't you lived well? From now on, just live your own life to the fullest. Don't remember me anymore, and don't feel guilty toward me either." Start Gavin, how could he possibly do it? Crouching before Priscilla's wheelchair, trembling as he reached to grasp her skeletal hand. "No, I haven't been doing well at all. These 3 years I've only lived to fulfill your past wishes. Priscilla, I keep cats and dogs, and have a yard full of cherry blossoms, all things you once wanted. You've seen them all, haven't you? Every single wish of yours. I'll make it come true for you. Please, don't leave me behind again." Gavin was practically begging her, and Priscilla, hearing his words, suddenly remembered all her past hopes for the future, how simple they were back then. "My dream is simply to keep a cat and a dog." She recalled that day when she visited Gavin's yard. Tess must have recognized her, which was why she kept tugging at her pant leg, but afraid of revealing her identity, she didn't even dare to give Tess a hug. What a pity. Priscilla's eyes reddened. Suddenly, a surge of coppery sweetness rose unexpectedly from his throat. Phut. A mouthful of blood spat right onto Gavin's face, causing his expression to change drastically, while the caregiver beside him immediately cried out in alarm. "Oh no, why is she coughing up blood again?" The bodyguards quickly gathered around. Priscilla wanted to tell them not to make a fuss, but before she could utter a word, she fainted. Gavin had no time to think. He didn't even wipe the blood from his face before scooping up Priscilla and rushing her to the hospital. Only when Priscilla was wheeled into the emergency room did he collapse against the wall, as if all strength had left his body. Some of the blood on his face had already dried. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. Thomas saw Gavin and immediately punched him in the face, growling, "What did you say to her again? She can't handle any more stress right now. Are you trying to push her to her death?" As he spoke, he threw another punch at Gavin's face. "She doesn't have much time left. Don't you know that, you bastard?" Gavin had initially shown no resistance, but upon hearing these words, his eyes suddenly widened, locking fiercely onto Thomas's gaze. He demanded, "What do you mean, she doesn't have much time left?" Gavin knew Priscilla had stomach cancer, but he also believed that over these 3 years, Thomas must have exhausted every possible means to treat Priscilla. Since she had managed to hold on for 3 years, her condition should have stabilized. Yet, he never expected Thomas to say such a thing. Priscilla's attending physician said her cancer cells are no longer under control. Thomas released his hand and spoke with equal despondency. "Current treatment methods can't predict how much longer they'll keep her alive." Another bolt from the blue. Gavin stood frozen in place, feeling as if something inside him had been torn in two. The heavens had been so cruel to him, after finally reuniting with Priscilla. He was now forced to watch helplessly as Priscilla left again. The reason I brought her back to the country this time was to help her relax, but I never expected her to suddenly fall ill. Gavin, I allowed you to get close to her because I know how important you are to Priscilla. If you dare upset her again, no matter how much she cares about you, I will never let you near her ever again. Thomas glared at him coldly, delivering his ultimatum. Gavin licked his dry lips. But he had no time to care about that. Is there really no hope? He said. Send her over here, let her receive the best treatment. I still have some funds, I can give you everything. Just let Priscilla live. If money could solve it, I would have cured Priscilla long ago, Thomas said. Birth, aging, sickness, and death are the most helpless matters in this world. Even if you possess boundless wealth, you cannot alter them. After what felt like an eternity, the light in the emergency room finally went out. The doctor emerged, drenched in sweat. Thomas and Gavin immediately approached. How'd it go? The doctor nodded. The heart is fine this time, but the cancer cells in her body are spreading too quickly. Sigh, her family should spend this time with her. The doctor didn't say more, but Thomas and Gavin understood completely. This time, no matter how the bodyguards tried to make him leave, Gavin refused to go. He kept vigil by the hospital bed until late at night. Thomas also cancelled all his work and stayed in the ward. The rare peace between the two lasted until Priscilla woke up to find someone sitting on either side of her. She opened her mouth, only to find her throat dry, before she could speak. Thomas was already holding a glass of water to her lips. How come you're both here? After drinking some water to moisten her throat, Priscilla finally asked. Thomas glanced at Gavin without hesitation and said softly to her, he insisted on staying. If you don't want to see him, I'll ask him to leave. Gavin looked at her nervously, instinctively reaching to hold her hand. Priscilla, don't send me away. I can take care of you. Stay with you anything, please. Don't send me away, now. Gavin seemed even more humble than when he had begged her not to leave all those years ago. Priscilla's hand trembled slightly as she remained silent for a long while. Thomas understood this meant her heart had softened. She was agreeing to let Gavin stay. From that day onward, Gavin visited Priscilla's hospital room every single day. Priscilla no longer resisted seeing him, but she wasn't particularly warm toward Gavin either, always keeping a distance and never speaking to him. Only when Thomas came by each day would she exchange a few words with him. 3 days later, Priscilla voluntarily requested to be discharged from the hospital. Thomas had initially refused. He knew that given Priscilla's current physical condition, staying in the hospital was the best option. The doctors had long ceased any other treatments for her, prescribing only some painkillers, but Priscilla might have already known her days were numbered, which is why she didn't want to waste her final moments in a hospital. Gavin suddenly asked, then where do you want to go, now? Priscilla could go anywhere, and they probably wouldn't refuse her. Priscilla thought for a long time before lifting her gaze to meet his eyes. This was the first time in so many days that she had actively spoken to Gavin. Go live in your courtyard. Gavin was startled but immediately nodded, saying, no problem. In the end, the group decided to take Priscilla back to that courtyard in the afternoon. After stepping out of the ward, Thomas glared at him coldly. Do you realize her current physical condition means living outside could lead to an accident at any moment? Gavin knew it all too well, but he understood even more clearly why Priscilla insisted on leaving at such a time. Thomas, do you know what her dream was? To raise a cat and a dog, living in a house where she could see cherry blossoms anytime. Right now, I'm infinitely grateful that at least I've made this one thing happen in these 3 years. I want Priscilla to live longer than you do, but she doesn't want to spend every day lying in a hospital like this. Let her live the life she wants, even if it's just for one day. Isn't that better? After hearing him out, Thomas was stunned. For a moment, it seemed he suddenly understood why Priscilla had never been able to forget Gavin. Perhaps it was because Gavin was truly the one person in this world who understood her. Thomas no longer objected to Priscilla's discharge. That afternoon, they brought Priscilla back to the bookstore. The bookstore has been closed for a long time, with weeds growing at its entrance. There are still 2 rooms in the courtyard, just enough for Priscilla and Thomas to stay. That's right, Thomas came along with Priscilla too, but after all, he's quite busy with work and can only return at night, as he has to work during the day. So after sending Priscilla over, he briefly instructed Gavin on a few matters before hastily departing. Priscilla had been in good spirits these past 2 days. After settling in, she walked into the courtyard when Tess suddenly came darting toward her again. This time, the dog sniffed left and right as if finally confirming this was indeed its owner, then began wagging its tail excitedly before her. Priscilla smiled and picked up Tess in her arms. Tess, you still remember me, don't you? Meow. Tilda the kitten responded eagerly. Over these 3 years, Gavin had taken good care of it. Tess was no longer the malnourished little thing from before and had gained quite some weight, and looked much more spirited too. I'm sorry for leaving you behind back then. I thought the landlady would take you in after I left. But it's good now, isn't it? You're happy here." As she spoke, she looked up and saw the golden retriever slowly approaching. Tyler wasn't as warm toward her as Tess was, instead maintaining an aloof demeanor. It wasn't until Gavin finished weeding outside and saw her holding Tess, then called out to Tyler, that the big dog came running over. "Its name is Tyler, which you also gave it." Gavin stroked Tyler's fur while saying to Priscilla, each holding a cat and a dog, they sat leisurely in the cherry blossom-filled courtyard. Had that accident not occurred years ago, perhaps this would have been the life they were meant to live now. Gavin seemed to recall something as well. His expression turning wistful. After a long silence, he spoke slowly. "Do you remember how you used to say that if we ever wanted cats or dogs, we had to get them before having children? You were worried we wouldn't have the energy for pets once a baby came along, back then." Her thoughts wandered so far ahead she even imagined having children. Priscilla forced a faint smile on her pale face. "I was too naive before, always thinking life was as simple as falling in love. All they needed was for two people to be happy, but life is full of unexpected accidents and setbacks. Back then, they were truly unlucky to encounter so many insurmountable hardships." The two sat quietly in the courtyard for a long time. The bookstore up ahead remains open as always, with the occasional student dropping by to browse books, Gavin never bothering to attend to them, and so it went until evening. Gavin personally prepared dinner again. Priscilla hadn't tasted his cooking in a long time, and now that she did, she felt Gavin's culinary skills had improved quite a bit. Perhaps it was the taste of the past, but her appetite was particularly good today. She finished an entire bowl of rice. In the evening, Thomas went to Priscilla's room to check on her first. When he returned, seeing that although her face was still pale, her spirits seemed slightly better, he finally felt relieved. On the third day, Gavin's study welcomed another visitor. Sarah stood hesitating at the bookstore entrance for a long time, unable to muster the courage to step inside. Last night Gavin called her and said Priscilla was still alive, asking if she wanted to see Priscilla one more time. Sarah was completely stunned. She came early in the morning, both longing to see Priscilla again and yet afraid of actually meeting her. 3 years ago, she had misunderstood Priscilla as a gold digger and said so many harsh words to her. Every single one of them now made Sarah want to slap herself. She was clearly once Priscilla's best friend. Yet when Priscilla was suffering so much, she kicked her while she was down and even became friends with Rosalind. Sarah stood at the shop entrance for a long time before finally making up her mind to step inside. She slowly made her way from the bookstore into the courtyard. As soon as she entered the courtyard, she saw a slender figure, so thin it seemed a gust of wind could blow her away, standing with her back turned, holding something in her arms. Sarah recognized her at first glance. It was Priscilla. Her eyes welled up as a choked cry escaped her throat. "Priscilla." The figure stiffened slightly at the familiar voice before slowly turning around. Priscilla, holding Tess, spotted Sarah standing not far down the corridor. "Never thought I'd see Sarah again," she murmured blankly. Sarah, the childhood nickname slipped out instinctively. Hearing those two syllables, Sarah's tears finally overflowed. Regret, guilt, anguish, all came flooding in. Priscilla watched her approach. "Why are you here? Weren't you staying in City J?" Sarah wiped the tears from her face as she walked, trying hard to keep her voice from trembling. "I came to City Y for business and heard from Gavin that you were back, so I came to see you." Priscilla nodded. The two friends who had once been so close they could talk about anything now stood face to face, seemingly at a loss for words. An air of unfamiliarity hung between them. Finally, Gavin walked into the yard and saw Sarah. "You're here, Sarah answered softly, gazing at Priscilla's sickly appearance, finally unable to suppress the guilt in her heart as she said, "Priscilla, I'm sorry. I truly didn't know you'd suffered so much before." If she had known, how could she possibly have said those sarcastic words to her? Priscilla smiled faintly. She didn't even resent Gavin, so how could she possibly resent Sarah? Priscilla took the hand of her once dear friend and said gently, "Sarah, I don't blame you. It was my choice to keep it from all of you. I'm already so happy that you came to see me. Please don't feel guilty anymore, okay?" But the more Priscilla said she didn't blame her, the more Sarah blamed herself. In the end, tears still streamed down her face, impossible to wipe away. Priscilla set Tess down and used her own sleeve to dry her tears. "Don't cry," she said. "My greatest wish is for all of you to be happy." Gavin also shot Sarah a meaningful glance. Sarah suddenly remembered that Gavin had reminded her yesterday not to let Priscilla get too excited, as she needed rest now. At last, the tears stopped. Having finally voiced the guilt that had weighed on her heart for years, Sarah made up with Priscilla. She also stayed with Priscilla in the courtyard for a long time and even joined her for dinner that evening. The two gradually rediscovered their former intimacy where they could talk about anything, just like during their high school days, chatting about everything under the sun. As the night grew deeper, Thomas returned and rested with Gavin and Priscilla. After Priscilla fell asleep, Gavin finally saw Sarah off. Gavin left, and Thomas tucked Priscilla in before preparing to leave, only to suddenly notice her eyes were open. "Why aren't you asleep?" Thomas asked her softly. Priscilla's gaze turned to Thomas as she suddenly spoke. "Thomas, do you ever regret saving me 3 years ago?" Thomas frowned. "Why ask that so suddenly? All these years you've been searching everywhere for doctors to treat me, spending so much energy and money, yet this is still the final outcome." Priscilla spoke in an increasingly softer voice. "I just feel really sorry for you. We're all going to die anyway. If I had died 3 years ago, it would have saved Thomas from wasting all this time on me these past 3 years. However, Thomas didn't see it that way at all. He said with utmost sincerity, "Priscilla, I'm infinitely grateful that I arrived in time to save you 3 years ago. These 3 years have never felt like a waste of time to me. If it weren't for you, I might never have had the courage to escape from the mental hospital back then. I might still be locked up there now. Between us, it was never me saving you, it was you who saved me. If there's one regret, it's that after escaping the mental hospital, I went our separate ways from Priscilla, making her endure so much more suffering." Thomas held her hand. "Priscilla, do you remember, we're engaged, even though our engagement was originally just you helping me ward off workplace admirers. I've always regarded you as my future wife." He liked Priscilla, liked her very much, perhaps no less than Gavin did. In the past, Thomas rarely spoke of such things, but now he couldn't hold back anymore. Perhaps Priscilla looked so fragile, as if she might vanish completely the next second. It frightened him. If he didn't speak now, he might never get another chance. Priscilla curved her lips into a smile. "What a pity. It seems we won't be able to complete our wedding after all." Actually, Thomas knew that even if Priscilla's health hadn't deteriorated, he and she wouldn't have truly married. Her heart always remembered Gavin, and the reason she had been so cold to Gavin lately might simply be because she knew her time was running out, and she didn't want Gavin to grow even more attached to her. Thomas understood clearly but didn't voice it, merely stroking her hair gently. "Sleep now." The three of them lived like this in Gavin's bookstore. The days passed in leisurely comfort. Sarah would also come by to sit for a while. Originally, her study period was up and she should have returned to City J, but she directly applied to stay in City Y instead. Priscilla was in good spirits every day with their company. Occasionally, she would even voluntarily help Gavin mind the store. Gavin was really too careless about this bookstore. Priscilla, so she helped receive customers a few times. At noon, Priscilla found a book and sat at the cash register reading slowly. 2 girls walked in. Priscilla found them somewhat familiar, then remembered they seemed to be the same 2 girls who had previously wanted to deliver a love letter to Gavin. "You chickened out last time when delivering the love letter. You can't back out again this time. Go confess to him." The friend vigorously pushed the girl forward. This time, the girl appeared much braver and didn't retreat at all. Instead, she looked at Priscilla and stammered, Please, where is the boss?" Priscilla found her shy demeanor quite amusing. Putting down her book, she smiled and said, "You know, he likes lively and cheerful girls. If you want your confession to succeed, you can't be this nervous." "Really?" The girl's eyes lit up as if she had found someone willing to guide her. Priscilla nodded. When it came to confessing to Gavin, no one had more experience than her. Of course, if he refuses the first time, just pester him twice or thrice more, he'll eventually agree. As she spoke, she even made an encouraging gesture toward the girl. "Thank you, sister, I'll definitely succeed." The little girl mustered all her courage, turned around, and saw Gavin standing not far away, watching them. She hadn't noticed when he'd appeared. The previously confident and spirited person immediately wilted, but with Priscilla's encouragement, she finally blushed and spoke up. "Gavin, I like you." The bookstore fell into silence for a moment before Gavin coldly replied, "I already have someone I like." The girl's face froze, but she still refused to believe it. "You're just saying that to reject me, aren't you?" Gavin didn't answer, just looked at Priscilla. His gaze clearly conveyed one message: the person I like is right here. The girl's eyes darted between them. Quickly grasping the implication, her face turned crimson with embarrassment, realizing she just asked Gavin for romantic advice about the very person he liked. Overcome with shame, she finally stormed out in a huff. Priscilla even caught the glimmer of tears at the corner of her eyes as she turned away, and couldn't help saying to Gavin, "Why didn't you give her even a single chance?" Gavin was actually very angry inside. He had also just heard Priscilla's words. How could she teach someone else how to pursue her? Did she really not care about him at all anymore? Gavin walked up to her and couldn't help but ask, "Why are you pushing me toward someone else?" Priscilla was taken aback and momentarily at a loss for words. How should she respond? She was already someone nearing death, so of course she hoped Gavin could step into a new life. Yet, Gavin had no desire whatsoever for any new life. Suddenly, he embraced Priscilla and murmured, "Don't push me away to others." Feeling his slightly trembling embrace, Priscilla was left speechless. Gavin held her quietly for a while before silently leaving and returning to the courtyard to prune the cherry blossom tree. Spring was nearing its end, and the cherry blossoms would soon be gone, just like Priscilla's life. But this time, at least she had fulfilled all her wishes. Gavin left, and she sat at the cash register, watching his retreating figure, in a daze. It was as if she saw the young man from many years ago again. Perhaps it's because the time is near that people always grow nostalgic. Lately, she found herself reminiscing about the past all too easily. Before she knew it, her eyes had reddened. She felt something strange in her throat, yet forcefully swallowed down that metallic tang. "It's not that I want you to push me away, Gavin, but fate has long been pulling us further apart." Priscilla had another episode on an utterly ordinary morning. Gavin prepared breakfast and called her to wake up. After several attempts, Priscilla still didn't rise. Finally, he entered the room and pulled back her blanket, only to find the person beneath it with a deathly pale face, and there was blood at the corners of her mouth. "Priscilla," Gavin called out. But Priscilla remained unresponsive. His heart pounded wildly as he immediately scooped her up and rushed out the door. Thomas also received the news and rushed to the hospital. Sarah hurried over as well. The three of them waited together outside the emergency room. Sarah kept praying to heaven that Priscilla would be all right. Meanwhile, Gavin and Thomas remained completely silent, but upon closer observation, one could see their hanging hands were even trembling. 2 hours later, the doctor emerged, and the three immediately surrounded him. Before anyone could ask anything, the doctor spoke with a grave expression. "Go in and talk to the patient." Everyone understood the unspoken implication behind those words. Sarah's tears instantly streamed down. The three immediately walked in and crouched by Priscilla's bedside. Priscilla had already woken up, her eyes slightly open, everything appearing blurry to her. Soon, her hand was grasped by someone. Sarah, who cried out to her, "Priscilla." Priscilla spoke with a faint breath. "Don't cry, Sarah. This body of mine has held on until now. That's already more than enough. I have no regrets at all. And you're not allowed to cry either, understand?" But Sarah couldn't hold back, still nodding through her tears as she promised. "I won't cry, I won't cry," Priscilla instructed sentence by sentence. "From now on, you must be a good doctor. This has always been your dream, and I'll be proud of you. Okay, I promise you. I'll be a good doctor." After finishing her instructions to Sarah, she went to see Thomas. Thomas's eyes also reddened, even though he had imagined this moment countless times. Seeing Priscilla lying before him as her life slowly slipped away was still unbearably painful. "Thomas," she called softly, "thank you for worrying about me for so long. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have lived until today. Thank you." Thomas held her hand, and even this usually composed man couldn't stop his sudden tears. "Don't say that. You never need to thank me. From now on, don't work yourself so hard. Money can never all be earned. You must take care of yourself too, understand?" Thomas nodded shakily. "I understand. I'll listen to you." Priscilla finally relaxed, and at last, she turned her gaze to Gavin. In truth, she could no longer clearly see Gavin's face, only vaguely making out his silhouette, yet his features remained vividly clear in her heart. Absent-mindedly, she reached out her hand, wanting to touch him. Gavin, Sarah and Thomas immediately stepped aside, letting Gavin come forward to her. Surprisingly, he was the calmest of the three. Never shedding a tear from start to finish, he leaned his face forward, and Priscilla's withered hand touched his cheek. At that moment, Priscilla's eyes also shed a single tear. "Gavin, stop blaming yourself, and stop watching over me. Promise me you'll be happy, okay? Tess and Tyler, you still need to take care of them." Gavin's voice was hoarse beyond recognition. "Don't worry, I know." Gavin placed his hand over hers that rested on his face, then suddenly leaned down to plant a kiss on her cheek. "Priscilla, I love you." Ever since their reunion, he had never dared to say these words to her, yet at this moment, he still wanted to tell her, "I have loved you from the age of 18 to 28, and that has never changed." And Priscilla smiled faintly the moment she heard those 3 words, but then her hand went completely limp and fell. Her eyes finally closed slowly. The Sarah standing behind could no longer hold back her sobs, and Gavin held Priscilla close until the last trace of warmth faded from her body. Priscilla's funeral was simple. It was Gavin and Thomas who arranged it, planting 2 cherry blossom trees together at her grave, and Gavin took his own life, just 1 week after Priscilla's funeral. Thomas left City Y. Sarah had a premonition, because the day before Gavin committed suicide, he sent Tess and Tyler to her house. He said he had something to attend to far away and asked her to take care of them. The next day, students coming to buy books found Gavin had slit his wrists under the cherry blossom tree in the yard. In the end, he couldn't fulfill what Priscilla had asked of him before her death. Unable to start a new life, there was no way to happily forget about her, so he chose the most direct way to go find her. Priscilla, I've come to be with you after all. I once promised you that, never shall we be parted.